What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni-sensei here with What If I Were Reborn in Lord of the Rings as Human-Elf Hybrid? The Greatest Ranger, Part 2. If you enjoy this type of content, please smash the like button into the fires of Mordor. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. Let's dive into the rise of a true ranger without further ado.
行くぜ
Aldril POV. My attention was fixed on the attribute points, 4 column. Certainly, seeing the numbers made me very excited. After all, it has been 2 months since I transmigrated / recovered my memories or whatever. This is the first time I've seen so many attribute points. The one attribute point I got from tiring was used to level up swordplay, which then evolved into Wolf School Style Level 1, which helped me quite a bit in the fight against the orcs. I'm pretty sure that the previous swordplay wouldn't have helped me much against the orcs, I thought as I took a look at my archery level. Currently, I had it at level 2. This skill had earned me the right to join the expedition and made me a very lethal archer. Thinking back to the time when I almost died because of my arrogance brought about a temptation to level up my archery. If at level 2 I am very lethal, what will it be like when I go up to level 3? But in the end I cleared that idea from my head, as I need to level up my other attributes. I need to be balanced. Military Survival Level 2 wasn't necessary for me to level it up, as it currently doesn't help me much. At level 2 I am more than capable of surviving in the wild. The other skill, Wolf School Style Level 1, would be perfect for leveling up. Despite being very good at level 1, I need more confidence, and for sure with level 2 my skill will increase tremendously. I'm very good at a distance, but now I need to improve in close combat. The previous fight made me realize that without Gandalf's help, I couldn't have defeated all those orcs and direwolves. There are also the 4 main attributes. Strength is easy to understand. It corresponds to physical strength. The Constitution is the characteristics that the body has and that determine my limits, so if at some point I reach my limit, this attribute will help me to overcome it. Agility is also easy to understand. It corresponds to one's speed, attack speed, and reaction speed. As for mentality, it has to do with my mental health and my ability to resist temptation, as well as having control of my emotions. Leveling up to all 4 attributes would be very helpful. My attention kept wandering between the columns of skills and attributes, thinking which one I would level up. I should level up archery. I'll need it to be able to kill Smog, I said to myself as I had the system level up archery, but I was disappointed to see the following message: insufficient skill points, 5 required. Crap, I figured as much. Apparently it won't be that easy to level up from level 2 to level 3. In that case, I'll need to kill more orcs to get more attribute points. I'll raise my sword skill. Wolf School Style Level 1, 2, Wolf School Style Level 2, attribute points, 2. The moment I leveled up, I could feel a warm current passing through my entire body. At that moment, new moves from the Wolf School style came to mind. As I went through the new moves that came to mind, I could glimpse as if it was a movie some The Witcher's fighting monsters and using these new moves along with some skills. So it doesn't make me stronger all at once. I need to practice these new moves and skills first in order to get stronger. In that case, I'll have to practice over the course of the trip. It's understandable that this happened, since apparently this system is very different from the rest of the transmigrants. It doesn't give me a power pulled out of my butt at the drop of a hat and turn me into a superior being in a matter of seconds without practice or anything like that. Now I only have 2 points left. After remembering what I'll be dealing with, I decided to level up the strength attribute, as this will help me kill tougher skinned beasts, such as trolls, more easily. Strength attribute to Strength attribute level 1 skill points. 1. A pale white light flickered in the attribute column and once again a warm current was injected into my body. This time I could really feel a great strength, so by instinct I clenched my fist slightly and boy did it feel like a big difference. Now I only had 1 point left, and what better than to raise agility, as it will increase my reaction time to evade and make me faster. Also, I could strengthen the speed with which I shoot arrows. Agility attribute to Agility attribute level 1. Skill points, 0. Another beam of light enveloped the attribute, and I could feel a small change in my body. This time I could feel a little lighter. It's a pity that so many skill points were spent just to level up the sword style. But now the main thing is to get stronger. On this trip, I could get more skill points. I was just hoping to get more before my impending encounter against Smog. In the end, my attributes looked like this: name, Aldril, race, human / Attribute points, 0, attribute, strength level 1, constitution plus, agility level 1, mentality plus, skill, universal language, military survival level 2, wolf school style level 2, archery level 2, talent, good fingers, special skill, world scan, 0.45%. Looking at the world exploration, I was a bit surprised. I hadn't paid attention to it at first, but now it went up a level. Most likely it was because of my first encounter with orcs. But seeing my skill points at 0 almost made me let out a sigh of sadness, but feeling the improvements in my body and the new memories in my mind, the sadness turned to happiness and excitement. Just when I had closed the system and was ready to get some rest, the voice of a dwarf made me open my eyes. "Hey Aldril, the food is ready," Bomber said to me. Getting up and stretching a bit, I enjoyed the aroma that was beginning to spread. Certainly, the deer meat smelled very delicious. The moment I took a step down, my feet felt slack and I slipped. Then, under the gaze of the others, I fell. "Aldril, what are you doing?" "Aldril, don't get so excited about the food." Ha 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 ha. A little embarrassed, I stood up and said, "My feet went numb." It was certainly embarrassing. I could even see how little Bilbo held in his laughter. But as if karma wasn't content with just embarrassing me, Bomber, in the rush to eat, tripped over a backpack and his body fell on top of the still smiling Bofer. The funny thing was that Bomber's but ended up on Bofer face. Ha/haha. Apparently Bofer is so hungry he wants to eat Bomber butt. The jeers were not long in coming. Certainly a cheerful atmosphere after a battle. I thought to then join in the laughter of the dwarves. General POV. The meal was accompanied by a pleasant atmosphere. It even seemed that we had not had a chase, as everyone was enjoying the food while making from time to time some jokes. The expedition team members were really tired. After finishing the meal, Thorin did not give the order to leave immediately. Instead, he told them to take a rest. Grateful for Thorin consideration, the expedition team members chatted, smoked, or went to sleep. Aldril was the only one who did not rest, however, as the rise in attributes caused him to recover from the fatigue he felt. As he recovered, he began practicing the new moves he had learned, eager to master them as quickly as possible. Bloom. A loud telekinetic wave could be seen as Aldril beckoned with his fingers. He was currently practicing a move characteristic of Witchers. Ard Sign, a simple magical signal used by Witchers, causes a telekinetic blast, rendering opponents helpless to defeat them easily. Phew. Aldril breathing could be seen heaving. This particular movement made him a bit tired, perhaps because his body is not used to using magic or because he is not yet in his best shape. "Phew, the way I see it, I'm turning into the Witcher," he said with a wry smile as he calmed his breathing. "I can feel my body slowly getting used to handling this magic, though it's still a bit exhausting. It may not be as advanced as Gandalf, but this magic would help him in his future fights. Alright, now it's time to practice the new sword moves." And so the hours passed. Aldril was currently wielding the sword with great dexterity and agility. His feet moved as if in a dance, moving with elegance. Each strike, each movement, was precise and calculated, demonstrating how well-versed the Witchers were in close combat. Swish. With the sound of a sword breaking the air, Aldril completed the movements he had learned. With a sigh, he stowed the sword on his back, as he found it more comfortable and it allowed him to run without fear of the sheath getting in the way. He was in a very good mood. He originally thought it would take him a few days to learn all the moves, but unexpectedly, the practice he had in a few hours allowed him to become familiar with the movements very quickly. As long as he continued to be consistent in his training, he should adapt and improve even more in a matter of weeks. Aldril POV. Maybe it's because of my constitution or something else hidden in my body, but I tend to learn things very quickly, I said to myself as I wiped my sweaty face with a rag and looked towards the camp. As I turned my head to look at the camp not far away, I saw that all the expedition team members were resting. I should also get some rest, I said as I sat down on a nearby rock and began to think about future events. I didn't have time to think because of the orc attack and because of my excitement to learn the new moves. But now that I am calm, there is one thing that bothers me, and that is that the plot has changed a bit. Of course it would change. My presence alone will alter the plot, I said to myself with a helpless sigh. Now I should use the plot only as a guide and not rely on it 100%. I pondered for a few moments while I drank some water. Now there was no need to think much about the plot. I should concentrate on improving the acquired skills as well as gaining more attribute points. This is the key to making myself stronger and being able to survive the coming events. With that said, I closed my eyes to fall asleep. General POV. As Aldril slept, an event was taking place in a corner of the ruined house where the group had camped. Gandalf and Thorin were chatting, and by the serious look on both of their faces, it was a very important talk. That group of orcs was too big to be just scouts, Thorin. This can't be a coincidence. Besides me, who else did you tell about the expedition? Said Gandalf as he looked at Thorin with a solemn look. No one, I told no one, Thorin said as he shook his head in denial. However, Gandalf did not believe him. You already lied once, Thorin. Don't you want to lie to me again, he said, but this time with anger in his voice. What are you talking about? At what point did I lie? Said Thorin incredulously and a little flustered by Gandalf's growing anger. You lied at Bilbo House. You didn't go to that meeting. Maybe the others didn't see anything unusual, but you don't fool me. You know better than anyone that you are the king, heir to Durin, and therefore the dwarves would take up arms if you asked them to. They would follow you blindly if you asked them to. At Gandalf's words, Thorin was silent. Perhaps he was wrong to lie to the others. That lie could be interpreted to mean that all the other dwarves were traitors and cowards who broke their oath to follow their king. Seeing the regret in Thorin's eyes, Gandalf calmed down a bit and in a low but serious voice said, They are probably looking for you to kill you. After Gandalf finished speaking, Thorin was surprised and immediately something clicked in his mind. They not only want to kill me, but also Keely, Dane, and Philly. They want to murder the whole lineage of Durin. Those bastards want to leave the dwarves leaderless. That explains why those orcs were not just scouts. They want to find him and all his family lineage that is still alive, and they have focused their attention on him and his nephews, since his cousin Dane is still safe in the Iron Hills. After being silent for a few moments while he thought, Thorin looked at Gandalf and in a serious voice said, If they are looking for us, we must hasten our journey even more. We must move. Nodding, Gandalf looked up at the sun on the horizon and said casually, It should not happen at the moment. Orcs don't like the sun. Then it's a good time to leave. We get a big head start on them before it gets dark. Gandalf shook his head and looked at the resting people. We experienced a battle last night and ran for most of the night. Do you think they will be able to continue in their present state? Besides, the horses are too tired, Gandalf said as he looked off into the distance at the group of resting horses, only to see Aldril Horse stomping merrily as he pestered the other horses. Well, only Aldril Horse looks in good condition, he thought. Hearing Gandalf's explanation, Thorin looked at him and with some irritation said, Then what are we supposed to do? Calmly, Gandalf said something that certainly irritated Thorin very much. We are near Rivendell. We can go there to rest and fill our supplies. Besides, the orcs dare not cross Lord Elrond territories, besides. But just as Gandalf would go on with his explanation, Thorin's angry voice interrupted him. No. I will not go near an elf's territory. Listen well, Thorin. Lord Elrond can help us decipher the message on the map. Help us? Did the elves help us when the dragon attacked Erebor? Did they help us when those damned orcs sacked Moria and desecrated our ancestral place? No, they just stood by and watched. Now do you really want me to ask for help from the people who turned their backs on my grandfather and father? Said Thorin with venom in his voice. Gandalf's suggestion made him very angry, bringing out the grudge he held inside. But you're not them. I didn't give you the map and the key to cling to the past. Seeing Thorin's stubborn behavior, Gandalf began to get angry again, causing his tone of voice to become serious. That is the key to the kingdom of Erebor, and you had no right to keep it, said Thorin still in his stubborn demeanor. Humph. With a snort, Gandalf turned and started to walk away, leaving Thorin alone. He certainly knew that dwarves were stubborn, but this time Thorin overcame stubbornness with irrationality. Clearly, the shouting woke some people up, and among them was Bilbo, who, seeing Gandalf upset and watching him walk away from the camp, quickly got up and approached the angry Gandalf. Is everything all right, Gandalf? Where are you going? I'm going to look for the only rational person in this group. Who is it? Asked Bilbo innocently. Certainly myself, Mr. Baggins, said Gandalf in a loud voice, causing the sleeping Aldril to wake up and draw his sword instinctively, only to watch Gandalf walk away from the camp. What did I miss? Wondered Aldril, still half asleep. General POV. After Gandalf left, the originally calm atmosphere could no longer be felt. Now there was only a very uneasy atmosphere. Everyone was worried about Gandalf's departure, and while everyone was silent, a great clap of thunder rumbled in the distance. The sound echoed throughout the camp, rattling the trees around and causing some of the dwarves to panic. Rumble. Puff. A fart sounded a few seconds after the thunder rumbled. Ugh. Damn it, Bomber, what the hell did you eat? Said Gloin as he backed away from Bomber. Damn, that scared me, said Bomber, ignoring Gloin's words as he put a hand to his chest to calm himself. Damn it. A storm is coming. We must seek shelter quickly, Bofer shouted as he gave a glance at the sky. Quickly, pitch a tent in the wooden house. The dwarves began to move quickly so that they could take shelter, as the sunny sky was now beginning to be covered with gray clouds. As the dwarves erected the tent, heavy raindrops began to fall, hurrying the dwarves even more, as they did not want to get wet. The sound of the rain hitting the ground mingled with the sound of frequent thunder and the shouts of the dwarves, who were coordinating their efforts to secure the camp. The moisture in the air was increasing, and soon the ground began to turn into a slippery sludge, making their movements difficult. Dwalin, make sure the stakes are driven well into the ground, Thorin shouted. Dwalin, his face wet, nodded and began hammering hard, securing the corners of the tent. And while this was going on, Aldril and Bilbo were helping the dwarves move the packs and the few supplies they had. After a few minutes, they were all sheltered under a tent in the abandoned house. Aldril and Bilbo stood in a corner of the house as they talked quietly. What happened to Gandalf, Bilbo? Aldril whispered his question as he drew some water and drank it. Gandalf had an argument with Thorin and then left the camp, Bilbo answered sheepishly and nervously. Gandalf and Thorin had an argument? At what point did it happen? Putting away his canteen, Aldril shot a sidelong glance at Bilbo as he asked. Just now before it rained. As soon as Bilbo answered him, something came to Aldril's mind and he began to see the abandoned house they were in. Squinting at the destroyed house, memories of the plot flashed quickly through his mind and he muttered, Trolls. Aldril POV. How come I didn't notice? I got too engrossed in resting and training that I ignored the clear signs of the upcoming plot, I said to myself as I took one more look at the house we were sheltered in. I immediately began to remember the plot to guide me in my next course of action. In the plot, Gandalf and Thorin had an argument. This took place in the destroyed house, and not far from this place are 3 trolls that ate the original owner of this destroyed house. These were discovered by Keely, Philly, and Bilbo, who noticed that horses were missing, and when they went to look for them, they found that these trolls wanted to eat the horses. After having a confrontation with the trolls, the dwarves were captured and subsequently saved by Gandalf, who used sunlight to turn the trolls to stone. Soon after, they discovered the troll cave with many treasures, among which were very famous elven swords. But now I got to thinking that maybe this will change, since the night before we had our first confrontation with the orcs when originally the orcs appeared after the troll attack. Snapping out of my thoughts, I turned to Bilbo and asked, Do you know what Gandalf and Thorin were arguing about? I wanted to make 100% sure that the argument was about going to Rivendell. Well, I didn't hear the whole argument. I only heard something about Rivendell and that Thorin refused to go there, Bilbo answered me as he shrugged his shoulders. I see, I said as I contemplated how I could slay those trolls. As I thought of possible solutions, I heard Bilbo's nervous voice. Aldril, Gandalf will be back, won't he? I raised an eyebrow at Bilbo's question. It was understandable that he was worried that Gandalf would not return. Don't worry, Gandalf will definitely be back. He's not the type to abandon his friends, I said as I gave him a reassuring smile. Besides, you have me here. Rest assured, I won't leave you alone, Bilbo. At my reply, Bilbo smiled and I could see his tense shoulders relax a little. All right, now that I know what will happen, I must prepare for the next confrontation. I must find some clues so that I can warn the others and be prepared in advance. If it stops raining, Thorin will surely tell us to move and therefore, we will not have the confrontation. But if the rain continues, we will stay here and increase the chances that we will fight the trolls. Looking at the big storm, which didn't seem to end, we will most likely stay here. I need to hurry to find clues and warn the others. After a few minutes, I thought of something that would be very believable. Hey, I thought about it. There are some neat parts in this house. It sure wasn't abandoned. It looks more like it was destroyed by something big, I said as I surveyed the place. Yes, now that you say it, it does look like it was destroyed. But what destroyed it? Balin answered me as he inspected the wood inside. But just then, there was a feeling in my chest, as if something was calling me. As I quickly turned to where the horses were, I could see Shadow Star running towards me, while a cursed troll was chasing him with a horse in his hand. At that moment, I could feel a lot of anger rising from within me. How dare that damn beast want to eat my fellow adventurer? I said to myself as I drew my bow and prepared to shoot. General POV, and as Aldril prepared to attack the troll, the other dwarves reacted and exclaimed, "What kind of monster is that? Damn it, that bastard is carrying one of our horses and chasing Aldril's. It's a troll, hurry up. We must free the horse and chase the bastard away," said Thorin as he saw an arrow fly out and hit the troll, that he had reached out his hand to grasp Shadow Star. At the arrow, the troll retracted his hand and looked to where the arrow was shot from. Seeing many dwarves, his eyes glittered and reflected hunger and annoyance. The troll, several feet tall, advanced heavily toward the group, its footsteps making the ground tremble. Seeing the troll approaching, the dwarves grabbed their weapons and prepared to fight, but were surprised to see a furious Aldril unsheath his sword and signal as he shouted, "Ard." At that moment, a telekinetic wave struck the face of the troll, who had bent down to grab Shadow Star. The telekinetic wave knocked him off balance, and Aldril seized the moment, leaping up and gaining momentum on a broken wall. "Let go of my horse, you freaking bastard!" Swish. His sword made a crisp sound, and with the sound, 3 large fingers flew out. At the sight of his fingers being severed, the troll roared in pain. "Ah, my fingers!" Seeing his fingers cut off, the troll, who was the stupidest of the 3, panicked and with heavy steps, ran away as fast as possible into the forest to call for help from his brothers. The dwarves, shocked at Aldril's movements, were stunned for a few seconds, only to be awakened by Keely's shout, "He hasn't let go of the horse yet. Hurry up, we've got to follow him." Damn it, look, they took 4 more horses. As the dwarves moved to follow the troll, Aldril approached Shadow Star, who was whinnying and leaning his head against Aldril. "It's past, big guy. Remember, as long as I'm here, no one can hurt you," Aldril whispered as he petted Shadow Star. His moment was interrupted by a startled Bilbo. "Aldril, the dwarves went off to chase the troll. Don't you think we should help them?" "Oh right. Come on Bilbo, we must help them." With that said, they both followed the dwarves. General POV Aldril and Bilbo followed the group of dwarves who had already entered the forest. As they entered, Aldril gave a weary sigh as he saw that 5 horses were missing. "Attack him. Be careful." From a distance, the screams of the dwarves could be heard, while in the distance they could see how the huge troll, who was at least 7 meters tall, was holding a horse tightly in his right hand. His left hand was bleeding deeply from the lack of 3 fingers, but apparently, the lack of fingers was no impediment to his grasping a tree trunk, which he swung wildly as he attacked the dwarves. On the other side, Philly and Keely could be seen repeatedly dodging and stabbing at the troll's feet, while the other dwarves distracted him. Watching in the distance as the troll fought with the dwarves, Aldril's thoughts quickly began to work. Now that he had calmed down from his anger, he noticed that the plot had changed again. Trolls don't usually come out during the day, plus there are 2 more missing. What is the reason for them to come out during the day? Is it because of the rain? Or is there another reason? Many questions came to Aldril's mind. "I said I should be prepared for the plot changes, but the changes have happened so fast," he said to himself with a hint of uneasiness in his eyes. The changes followed overwhelmed him a little, and he should quickly adapt to them, for if he only went by the knowledge of the plot of the movies, he would sooner or later die from being overconfident. "Aldril, what do we do?" asked a nervous Bilbo as he saw the dwarves fighting in the distance, and a feeling of bravery welled up inside him, prompting him to help them. "Take the remaining horses next to Shadow Star, and then come and help us," Aldril answered him as he readied his bow with an arrow and moved forward to help the dwarves. While Aldril and Bilbo arrived, the dwarves were fighting with the troll who, seeing that they were following him, turned around and angrily took a tree trunk and began to attack them. Bofer, with a spiked mallet, rushed to hit the troll's leg, who had turned around to hit Keely and Philly. Feeling the blow, the troll quickly swung the log toward Bofer. Watching as the log came at him, Bofer quickly rolled to the side, accidentally stuffing his face with mud. "Baba damn, I think I swallowed some mud," Bofer said to himself as he quickly got up to continue fighting. "Damn, he's got thick skin. How come Aldril was able to cut his fingers off? Thorin said as he devised a strategy to deal with the troll. And as Thorin devised his strategy, an arrow shot out and embedded itself in the troll's nostrils, causing him to cry out in pain. Ow, my nose. Startled, Thorin turned around only to find a grinning Aldril. You were calling for me? You came at just the right time, Thorin said, giving him a faint smile. As Thorin and Aldril spoke, the troll, feeling a sharp pain in his nose, screamed and roared in pain. The pain was so strong that he unconsciously let go of the horse and brought his right hand to his nose, only to pull out an arrow filled with his blood. Looking in the direction where the arrow came from, the troll saw the human who had cut off his fingers, and perhaps because of his anger, he forgot the danger he felt from this human that made him run away the first time. Damn human, I'm going to eat you. The pained troll didn't care about the horse that let go of his hand and had already run away. He didn't even pay attention to the blows and cuts the dwarves were giving him. He simply roared and ran towards Aldril, not caring that moments ago his instinct told him to stay away from the human after his fingers were cut off. Stupid. Aldril sneered and the bowstring tightened. 2 arrows shot out. The troll, believing the arrows would go towards his eyes, put his hand over his eyes to protect them, only to feel the sharp pain again from seconds ago. Shiss. Shiss. Ah, my nose hurts, you damn human. The screams rang out again, and unlike what the troll believed, the arrows Aldril fired were once again aimed at his nostrils. Originally, Aldril wanted to shoot them in the eyes, but seeing how the troll covered them, he decided to shoot at another of their weak spots. Perhaps his rationality returned for a few seconds after feeling immense pain. The troll, removing his hands from his eyes, was able to dazzle the human well, and seeing him, panicked. Before everyone's eyes, the troll turned around and started running with his heavy steps, hurrying to get away from that human who was making his instincts go crazy, telling him to run away. At first, he didn't think anything of it, believing that with his size and tough skin they couldn't hurt him, but he got a surprise when he saw how that human was able to cut his fingers with ease. This made him realize that he had made a mistake and had to escape from that terrifying human. He's running away, shouted Gloin as he tried to chase the troll. Seeing how the troll was running, Aldril took the opportunity to fire an arrow again, this time hitting it in the back of the neck. Where do you think you're going, you bastard? Shiss. Ah. The troll screamed again in pain. Feeling that if he didn't hurry he would die, the troll advanced faster, and being bigger than everyone, he was able to cover a longer distance with just a few more steps, managing to distance himself from the group. Aldril, being faster than the others due to his size and agility enhancements, could catch up with the troll. Besides, he could already imagine that maybe he would get skill points for killing this troll. But as he prepared to follow it, Thorin's voice came not far behind him. Aldril, there's no need to chase it anymore. We already recovered the horse and chased it away. There's no need to risk following it, Thorin said as he shook his head. But he's hurt, we can kill him easily. Besides, he might come back. Aldril didn't want to let him go so easily. Besides the fact that he could get skill points, there was the chance to get rid of one of the 3 trolls and thus have a better chance to kill the other 2 and then steal their treasure and the elf swords. Contrary to Aldril's thoughts, Thorin did not want to risk his men. Besides, a troll was not easy to kill due to its stature and tough skin. He didn't want any casualties on his team. Don't worry, we won't stay here for long. We'll leave as soon as the rain stops, Thorin said in a calm voice. But they took 4 horses. We should get them back, Thorin, Keely said as he approached Thorin. We'll manage with the ones we have, Thorin rebutted. Indeed, he changed the plot, Aldril thought, almost giving up on getting the elf swords. However, Philly's shout caught everyone's attention. More trolls. Under the heavy rain, the same troll appeared again, only this time he was followed by 2 more. They were clearly not far from the troll camp, and as they let the troll from moments ago escape, the troll called out to the others for help. Seeing the trolls approaching, Thorin's expression darkened and he quickly began to issue orders. We need to split up, don't fight head-on, distract them and surround them, Thorin shouted, as he gave Aldril a look. Aldril, do you think you can take one on your own? At Thorin's question, Aldril drew his bow again. Leave it to me, when I manage to kill it I'll help them. Very well, I hope you don't die. Nodding towards Thorin, Aldril watched as the trolls approached and with all his concentration, shot an arrow into the eye of a troll. Shiss. One of the trolls, oblivious to the danger, kept moving forward, ready to kill those who wounded his sister, only as he took the next step, The sight in his left eye went completely black, and with it came a sharp pain. I can't see. The troll let out a piercing roar, bringing a huge hand to his face. The arrow was stuck deep in his eye, and blood gushed out, drenching his face in a dark, sticky torrent. His brothers paused for a moment, confused by the sudden howl of pain. "Brother! What happened to you?" cried one of the trolls, watching his wounded brother stagger and thrash against the trees in a desperate attempt to pull the arrow out. "You bastards!" bellowed the wounded troll, moving awkwardly as he tried to locate his attackers. "I'll kill them and eat them all." And with that, the second fight against the trolls began. General Pui, the raindrops were falling slowly, making a soft plick-plick against the troll's horrible face. The three were walking quickly through the forest, searching for the human who hurt their brother. However, they were bewildered, as they could only see a dozen small creatures holding weapons in front of them. One of the trolls, 4 meters tall with a round bald head, said sharply, "This is the first time I've seen anything so small. What are they? Are they humans too?" "They should be dwarves. Mom caught some when I was little," replied the other troll, who seemed to be the older brother, as he was the tallest, with a height of 10 meters. The smallest troll, with a height of 4 meters, reached out his hand to scratch his bald head and thought for a few seconds before speaking. "Can they be eaten?" "Of course they can be eaten, just like humans," said the larger troll loudly. "The humans we captured last time were not tasty. The meat was too old, and I can still feel one of their ribs in my tooth," said the smaller one. "Idiot, those were 2 old farmers. They were thin and didn't have much meat. Of course they weren't going to be delicious." The bigger troll patted the smaller troll on the head and continued in a low voice, "These dwarves are different. Look at that fat dwarf, he like a meatball. He sure is delicious," he said as he looked at Bomber. "Hey, were these dwarves the ones that hurt you?" asked the little guy to the troll who was missing his fingers. "No, those dwarves weren't. They just hit me, but their blows didn't hurt me much." "Oh then, who was it?" The larger troll looked at the middle brother, who was leading the way. "It was that human next to that dwarf," said the troll as he pointed at Aldril. "That human has a very sharp sword, brother. Plus when he gets angry he is very scary." Hearing his brother's words, the larger troll's eyes seemed to light up and he immediately said, "Then let me kill him." "No, I'd better eat it. It looks very delicious." He could already imagine how delicious that human must be, since from afar he could feel its strong and dangerous presence. Over his years, he learned that those with a dangerous presence were the most delicious. As he was lost in his fantasies, mentally savoring the feast ahead, his vision dimmed on his left side and he felt an excruciating pain that made him instinctively bring his hand to the place where he felt the pain. His mind took a moment to process what had happened, the shock and pain clouding his reasoning quickly. "Oh my eye! I can't see!" he screamed in desperation. Dark blood drained from his eye, staining his hand and dripping to the ground. The pain was intense, giving him a tingling sensation that spread from the wound to the middle of his face. As he tried to focus with his remaining eye, the blurred, choppy vision searched swiftly for his assailant. His mind was still dazed from the surprise attack, but he slowly began to regain clarity. He felt fury replace the pain, a blind rage rising from within him. He could only think of revenge and killing the one who hurt him. "Damn you!" bellowed the wounded troll, moving awkwardly as he tried to locate his attacker. "I'll kill you and eat you all." With its roar, it advanced rapidly towards the group of dwarves. The other trolls, bewildered by the sudden attack, recovered from their initial shock and with a roar, charged in support of their brother. "They're coming, split up as agreed," shouted Thorin, raising his sword to prepare the dwarves for combat. "Let's show them what Durin's dwarves are made of." Aldril was the first to move to intercept the larger troll. Rain drenched his dark hair as he drew his sword, which caused a faint silver flash under the gray sky. The wounded troll, still bleeding from the eye, roared in fury at the sight of the human rushing to confront him. You're the one who hurt me," bellowed the troll, his voice echoing like thunder in the forest. "I'm going to gut you and devour you." Faced with the threat posed by the troll, Aldril took a very serious attitude. He did not want the same thing to happen as with the Wargos. This time he would give everything without being confident. "Try if you can, you bastard," Aldril whispered. With a quick swing of his sword, the blade cut through the air with a hiss. Aldril's eyes were fixed on his enemy with absolute concentration. Aldril's sword movement found its target, slicing its way through the troll's right thigh. The slash was so deep that it severed an artery, and from the wound came a torrent of blood that stained the ground with a dark substance, forming a puddle that mingled with the rain falling from the gray sky. The troll let out a roar of pain. The attack caused it to fall to one knee. In an attempt to attack, the troll threw a swipe with the aim of hitting the human. Seeing the oncoming attack, Aldril ducked. He felt the air shift from the powerful blow that passed over his head. With one fluid motion, Aldril rose and slashed with his sword. The blade sliced through the raindrops as it headed for the troll's elbow. The blade's edge was sharp enough to cut the ulna bone that joined the humerus, causing the troll's arm to go limp. "Aw!" was the troll's pained cry. He could not understand how this simple human being could hurt him so badly in such a short time. Not even the many human warriors he devoured some time ago could damage him to this extent. It was too humiliating. Aldril watched as his sword, bathed in the troll's blood, glowed with a silvery light, causing the blood to slide off, as if it had landed on a hydrophobic surface. The troll, feeling dizzy from the enormous loss of blood, made a desperate attack, hoping to kill the human. However, these hopes were shattered, since Aldril, with great agility, dodged the attack and, taking advantage of the fact that the troll was on one knee and with one arm useless, made a strong leap and forcefully plunged his sword into his chest. Such was the force he applied that he pushed the troll, who was now lying prone. The sword found its way through the hard bones of the chest and found its end in the troll's heart. With bated breath, Aldril drew his sword, which came out without much difficulty, still retaining its silver sheen. Ignoring the strangeness of the sword for the moment, Aldril turned his attention to the others, who were still fighting with the remaining trolls. With the dwarves. Seeing how Aldril caught the attention of the largest troll, the others got to work and hurried forward. According to Thorin's instructions, they split into two groups, one of 6 and the other of 7. The group led by Thorin, Balin, Dori, Nori, Ori and Oin faced the medium-sized troll, who not long ago lost his fingers to an angry Aldril. Seeing how his older brother would deal with the human, the medium troll gained confidence and, with heavy steps, faced the group. Despite the injury to his hand and nostrils, the troll believed it would be easy to deal with these simple dwarves. But would the dwarves accompanying Thorin Oakenshield be simple? Of course not. They quickly demonstrated how capable they were. With much coordination, they waited for the right moment to strike. The troll, in his confidence, threw a strong blow with his wounded hand. However, the dwarves, with their coordination and good reflexes, dodged the incoming attack. The blow impacted on the hard ground, causing the blood still gushing from his severed fingers to be scattered to the surroundings. "Ouch, it hurts!" he cried out. The force applied caused the bleeding wound to open even wider, proving that of the 3 brothers he was the most stupid by using his injured hand for the attack. Taking his other hand instinctively to cover the wound, he became careless, allowing the dwarves to attack him. Rushing forward, the dwarves attacked the troll's crotch, legs, and toes with their axes and hammers. All these parts were constantly struck by the dwarves led by Thorin. The troll, roaring angrily, looked at the hateful dwarves who were still beating him. With his non-bleeding arm, he slapped hard towards where Thorin and Balin were standing. Despite his age, Balin showed that he was still very agile. For the moment they saw the troll raise his arm to smash them, they both threw themselves to the side, causing the troll's slap to be marked in the dirt. Boom! The ground shook from the violent attack. Mud and water splashed everywhere. It was at that moment that Thorin, his face caked with mud, shouted, "Oin! Throw your dagger at his eye!" The troll, having neglected his face, was greeted by a thrown dagger, which traced a line as it spun and inserted itself into his right eyeball, causing black blood to gush from it. "Ouch! You hurt my eye!" shrieked the troll as he fell on his buttocks, losing his balance from the pain of his bleeding eye. "Nori!" At Thorin's cry, Nori, in a tacit understanding, used her arms to help leap Thorin towards the troll's body. At that moment, Thorin Oakenshield showed his courage, advancing across the troll's body to then leap and plunge his sword into the troll's other eye socket, causing his sword to embed itself so deep that it reached the brain, causing the troll to stop moving after a few seconds of struggling. Upon seeing the troll's corpse, the dwarves began to celebrate. However, Thorin's loud voice interrupted their festivities. "This is no time for celebrate. We have to help the others," he said, watching as the other group dealt with the last of the trolls. The last troll, besieged by Keely, Philly, Dwalin, Gloin, Bifer, Bofer and Bomber, watched as his brothers were slain and in endless rage roared, "You bastards! You murdered my brothers! I'll tear you to pieces!" With unbridled fury, the troll began to stomp and punch at random. All kinds of stones, logs and earth were scattered around, preventing the dwarves from approaching. Shisei Chach. Keely, like a good archer, aimed for the troll's nostrils. A few minutes ago he could see how Aldril's attack on the nostrils was very effective, so, implementing the same technique, he shot an arrow. This unbalanced the troll, who drew his hands towards his bleeding nostrils. In disbelief, he pulled the arrow out of his nose and could see how it was covered in blood and snot. "Damn dwarf!" he roared towards Keely, since he was the only dwarf with a bow. However, in his rage, he didn't notice the shadow moving swiftly behind him. Splash! The sound of flesh being pierced echoed through the now silent forest. The rain, which used to fall incessantly, had ceased, leaving an eerie silence and a sky covered in gray clouds. At some point, Aldril sneaked around the troll's back and with a mighty leap, inserted his sword into the troll's head, piercing its skull and brain at the same time. The troll's corpse began to fall forward, and with it, an Aldril holding his sword tightly. Boom! The corpse fell heavily, kicking up the mud around it. "And that was the last one," Aldril said with slightly bated breath. There was silence for a brief moment, only to be broken by the feasting of the dwarves. "Yes. We defeated the trolls. Those bastards brought it on themselves." Aldril, still with the sword embedded in the troll's head, gave a smile and a sigh of relief. It was in that moment of celebration that a loud voice coming from a gray-robed wizard was heard. "What the hell happened here? And why do I leave for a few minutes and find them with the corpses of 3 trolls?" Aldril POV, Gandalf, where have you been? "You missed a great fight," I said with bated breath as I pulled the sword out of the troll's massive head. The recent battle had consumed what little stamina I still had in me. Adrenaline, as my great ally, was the only thing that kept me in top condition for the fight. I just went to relax a bit. "The stubbornness of dwarves is unbearable, even for me," he said as he approached. His gaze fixed like a hawk on my sword, which still glowed with a silvery sheen that gradually dimmed after the dark blood that stained its beauty was drained away. "May I take for a moment your sword?" asked Gandalf politely. His curiosity was evident. It wasn't every day I saw a glowing sword, let alone one that gave off a silvery white glow. "Sure," I said as I handed him the sword. It was at that very moment when he took the sword that a strong wind blew. A subtle change in the atmosphere was felt by all. As I placed my hand in front of my face to avoid the dust blowing in the wind, I caught a glimpse of Gandalf's incredulous face out of the corner of my eye. "The sword is rejecting me," I heard him mutter, being aware of the change in the atmosphere. Gandalf quickly, but politely, handed the sword back to me. As soon as I took it back, the wind ceased and the atmosphere returned to its initial quietness. A subtle silver glow reappeared, as if it was recognizing me, and then returned to its original form. "What happened?" I asked incredulously. I couldn't describe the feeling from moments ago. I was bewildered. I thought the sword was just that of a sorcerer, but such seems not to be the case. "Your sword, Aldril, is no ordinary weapon. It is imbued with powerful magic. It is as if the sword has a consciousness of its own, a magical bond that binds it uniquely to you," Gandalf said, snapping me out of my thoughts. "So does this mean that the sword and I are connected somehow?" I asked with a raised eyebrow. I had been getting several surprises in such a short time. "That's right, if Thorin stops being stubborn and we go to Rivendell, we can ask Lord Elrond to help us identify the sword," Gandalf said with a mysterious gleam reflected in his eyes. Okay," I nodded expectantly. I knew that, despite Thorin's stubbornness, we would go to Rivendell. I wished to find clues to my origin there, and now I also needed to find out why the sword was attached to me. Would it be because of the system? I don't think so. Something inside me tells me that the system had nothing to do with it, and that all my answers will be answered in Rivendell. Gandalf nodded his head, his expression became thoughtful, and he spoke no more on the subject. He turned to look at the hideous corpse of the troll. "So, can you tell me how you met the trolls?" he asked with curiosity and concern in his voice. "After we took shelter from the rain, one of these idiots came out of the woods chasing after my horse," I said as I tapped my foot lightly on the troll's corpse. "I chased him away, but the bastard had taken a horse with him, so the dwarves chased him. We managed to save the horse, but the troll came back with 2 more, and you can imagine the rest," I said as I motioned with my hand for Gandalf to see the corpse of the other trolls. It was at that moment that a soft glow of light appeared, scattering the gray clouds and giving way to a clear, glowing sky. The sunlight filtered through the gaps in the leaves, and as it touched the troll corpses, they began to transform into stone. Surprised at this occurrence, The other dwarves stopped celebrating and curiously approached the corpses that now lay like sculptures made of stone. So they were stone trolls, Gandalf said as he gave them a sidelong glance. Stone trolls? Are there more than one kind of trolls? I didn't know at what point a wild Bilbo appeared behind us as he asked curiously. Bilbo, I thought you were with the horses, I said puzzled. I imagined he would still be looking after the horses. Oh, about that. Your horse looked like he was looking after them. So I plucked up the courage to come and help, but such seems my help is unnecessary. Besides, I found this key on the road, Bilbo told me as he showed me a key he seemed to be dragging. So, are there more types of trolls? Bilbo asked expectantly. It seemed that his adventurous side was blossoming quickly, which is different from the plot. But what good is the plot now? Many events have changed, from the attack of the orcs, to the attack of the trolls, to their subsequent murder by me and the dwarves, which did not happen in the movie. Oblivious to my thoughts, Gandalf nonchalantly replied to the curious hobbit as he tapped the stone troll with his staff. Of course there is more than one kind of troll. There are mountain trolls, rock trolls, cave trolls and more. The trolls now are rock trolls. They usually come out at night because if they come out in the daylight they will turn to stone, Gandalf explained. As soon as Gandalf finished his explanation, a soft but gravelly voice sounded behind him. That explains why their corpses turned to stone, but the question is, why are these troll types here in the south? Thorin, curious, asked his question, waiting for the Grey Wizard's explanation. They have ventured ever since a great dark power inhabited these lands, Gandalf said with a grim face, as if he did not wish to speak much on the subject. But if they turned to stone in the sunlight, why did they dare to go out in broad daylight? Curiously asked Bilbo. Perhaps the idiots mistook the cloudy day for night and thought there would be no trouble if they went out. If we hadn't killed them sooner or later, the daylight would have turned them to stone, I explained as I walked over to the key that was about 4 feet tall and hoisted it over my shoulder. General POV, yes, that makes sense, Gandalf stated. Besides, rock trolls like to collect things, and the key you bring with you must be the one that opens the door to their cave. It wouldn't hurt to take a look. Hearing Gandalf's explanation, many dwarves stopped celebrating and with excitement and a greedy gleam in their eyes approached him. What do trolls like to collect? They sure are valuable things. Let's investigate. Maybe these monsters, like dragons, like to collect treasures. How do you know dragons like to collect treasure? Didn't they read you stories when you were a child, Gloin? Besides, remember Smaug attacked Erebor for the gold. Oh right, I had forgotten. Come Bilbo, follow me, we are going to find the troll cave, Aldril said as he walked forward with the key on his shoulder, and a curious Bilbo followed him. Watching as everyone began to disperse to search for the cave, both Gandalf and Thorin were speechless. Aldril was moving in the direction the trolls were coming from. The huge footprints left in the earth were his guide, pointing the way, and apparently the footprints were guiding all the dwarves that at some point were behind him and Bilbo. Aldril quickened his pace, determined to get another sword, and it would not be just any sword. He knew from the plot that the swords in the cave belonged to the High Elves of Gondolin. Moreover, thanks to the attributes of the system, he could wield 2 swords easily, further increasing their lethality. His quickened pace quickly distanced him from the dwarves. Bilbo, in a surprising display of agility, kept pace with him. He was very curious to know what they would find in the cave. They quickly came to a rocky wall. It was easily distinguishable that it was the lower part of the mountain. Aldril and Bilbo began to search for the door to the troll cave, feeling the rocky wall and looking for a crevice where the key would fit. Meanwhile, the dwarves had scattered, going the wrong way, allowing Aldril and Bilbo to search the cave quietly without hurrying. After a few seconds, Bilbo's cheerful shout was heard, causing Aldril to rush over to him. Aldril, I found the door. Quick. Open it, here's an indentation. Pointing to an indentation, Aldril quickly inserted the key and forcefully turned it. The moment he turned it, a part of the cave opened inward, giving them a dark view. For Aldril, however, the darkness was no longer an impediment. He could easily see the stairs. As he descended, a strong putrid smell reached his nostrils, causing him to pause for a moment to hold his nose. Whoa, what a horrible smell, said Bilbo with his stomach churning from the terrible odor, almost causing him to vomit up this morning's breakfast. I know, but we have to put up with it if we want to see what's down there. He knew that for his eyesight the darkness was no longer any impediment, but his nose was still normal and he could smell the foul odors of the cave. But with determination he went deeper into the cave. No putrid odor would prevent him from reaching his goal. As he entered the cave, he could see that the cave was very spacious, with a gloomy atmosphere. Gnawed bones scattered throughout the cave could be seen. Skeletons of animals and humans were everywhere, proving that these trolls had been haunting this place for some time. The moment Aldril took a step forward, his sword, as if finding something important, began to glow. Its silver glow illuminated the cave, clearing the putrid scent. Surprised by this development, Bilbo quickly said, "Aldril, your sword is glowing." However, he got no response as Aldril, as if hypnotized, advanced with quick steps towards the back of the cave, reaching a shelf containing several weapons. Reaching out, Aldril pulled a sword from the shelves. As if recognizing the call of Aldril's sword, it vibrated and reflected a dark flash. It was at that moment that Aldril heard a rough, dry voice speak in his ear. When the shadows of antiquity resurface, the twin swords will come together once more at the hands of those chosen by fate. The steel of Gondolin, forged with the fire of fallen stars, will awaken. In the union of blades, dormant power will be unleashed, bringing with it the light needed to face the growing darkness. Anglical and Anguirel. He murmured in a trance-like state, as the two blades glowed in resonance at the mention of their name's title. Anglical and Anguirel, Aldril Pov Anglical and Anguirel, I murmured as I stared at the two blades in my hands. Sometime during my trance, I had unsheathed both blades, which now glowed in sync, as if they recognized each other after centuries of separation. Anglical, I whispered, admiring the sword in my right hand. Its hilt was delicate and elegant, decorated with intricate elvish engravings. The blade, black as deepest night, seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, emitting a dark glow. At the mention of her name, Anglical glowed with an even more intense dark flash, and a current of energy coursed through my body. I felt the sword's willingness to accept me as its owner, a bond formed that bound her to me. Anguirel, I whispered again, looking at the twin sword in my left hand. Its hilt was of equally high quality and elegance, but its blade was completely different, silver as moonlight and bright as a star. The sword that gave me the system in that dream with Geralt. But why? I thought it was a Witcher's silver sword, but I was mistaken. As I contemplated both swords, a bluish glow on the same shelf caught my eye. It was a familiar glow, a light I knew well, the mythical Sting dagger. I shook my head and smiled wryly as I stowed Anglical and Anguirel in their sheaths. Their glows began to dim as they entered the sheath, as if entering a deep sleep. With a quick step, I picked up the dagger, which was still glowing brightly. "I'm sorry, but you would help a little hobbit more. Without you, his fate could be only death," I whispered, turning to see Bilbo, looking at me with wide eyes. "Take this, Bilbo. It will help keep you alive." I tossed it to Sting, who seemed reluctant to let me, but finally gave in. If someone told me it was stupid to give Bilbo the dagger, I would disagree. In the movie, the sword saves him from many dangerous situations. Also, I've grown a little fond of this hobbit. He's a good friend and I don't want him to die because of my greed. "But I don't know how to handle the sword properly," Bilbo said, holding Sting awkwardly. The light from the dagger had dimmed as if assessing its new wielder. Raising an eyebrow, I reminded him, "Remember, you will be learning swordplay from me and will become proficient in no time. You lack only self-confidence, Bilbo." At my comment, Bilbo lowered his head and nodded, accepting the truth of my words. Unsheathing the dagger, I heard a soft wow from Bilbo, as the perfection of the dagger had enchanted him. It was in that moment of contemplation that a cry outside the cave rang out, causing us both to look at the cave entrance. This way, I found the entrance. Damn, this place stinks. I can hardly keep my eyes open. Is there any treasure here? I can't see anything. Wow, look what we found. Those big chunks of feces, the dirty, smelly straw, and the bones they left behind. Are these the treasures we're looking for? Where are Aldril and Bilbo? Stop being idiots, you have to look hard. Great, look at all those coins. The jumbled footsteps and mingled voices of the dwarves were particularly loud. The silent cave could no longer be seen anywhere. We just kept quiet without letting the dwarves know we were there. "Quick, Bilbo. Grab anything you like before the dwarves arrive," I said, encouraging him as he hurried towards the treasure chests scattered around us. A smile graced my face as I watched Bilbo move nimbly, his eyes sparkling with excitement as he rummaged through the treasures. Shaking my head, I approached a chest brimming with gold coins and jewels. Despite showing that I was calm, The truth was the opposite. I found myself with many chaotic thoughts, and countless questions running through my mind. Why did the swords choose me? Whose voice was that? Who am I? What are my origins? Why did I transmigrate? Many questions, but still unanswered. I hope we get to Rivendell fast. I need to find answers, I said to myself. General Poof. Finally, after a few minutes, the dwarves arrived at Aldril and Bilbo's location. As they approached, their faces reflected joy at the many treasures scattered around, and relieved not to smell any foul odors in this section. Aldril, Bilbo, we found them at last. Turns out they were faster than us. I told them we should have followed Aldril and Bilbo. Hey, there's a lot of coins scattered around. We need to sort them out. At some point, several of the dwarves began to pick up the coins desperately scattered on the ground. To Aldril, it was certainly a very funny sight. He was not surprised by the dwarves' behavior. A month ago, Gandalf had told him how they behave when they see a lot of treasure. The dwarves, with their waving beards and glittering eyes, looked like children at a festival, each vying to pick up the shiniest coins. The cave echoed with the tinkling of gold and jubilant laughter. Soon the missing members arrived: Gandalf, Thorin, and Balin. With a raised eyebrow, they watched the other dwarves shuffling about as they collected coins. Gandalf, Thorin, take a look over here, Aldril said, catching their attention and signaling with his thumb for them both to approach a rack of weapons. As they approached, they both grabbed the only two remaining swords. As he unsheathes his sword, Thorin's face becomes very serious. In a deep voice, he said, "These weapons could not have been forged by trolls. They don't even appear to be forged by dwarves. Perhaps some human forged them." Despite being a king, Thorin had much knowledge of blacksmithing, for he had worked as a blacksmith for many years, and along with this, he gained vast knowledge. Unsheathing the other sword, Gandalf nodded as he contemplated it. Perhaps forged by elves. Who knows? But these runes written on the blade of the sword are certainly of the Elvish language. Hearing that they were possibly Elvish, Thorin's face showed hesitation about whether to keep it or leave it. However, he did not expect Gandalf's next words. "Don't think too hard. Elvish swords of this caliber are usually very rare. May your judgment against the elves not cause you to give up a very good sword." Even reluctantly, Thorin placed the sword at his waist. Though he showed reluctance, deep inside he was pleased. He hated elves, that was true, but he would not say no to a sword of such a good caliber. Gandalf gave Aldril and his new sword a glance. He was certainly curious to know if this new sword would be just as magical as the old one, but in the end, he opted not to ask. As Aldril led Thorin and Gandalf to the weapons rack, the other dwarves had finished lifting all the coins and placed them in a chest. "How should we distribute the treasure?" asked one of the dwarves. "It's very simple. We should divide it equally," suggested another. The conversation flowed with enthusiasm as they decided the fate of their newly discovered treasure. "Good idea. Do you want to divide it now?" asked Bofur. "We have a long journey ahead of us. It's not convenient to take it with us. Why don't we bury it and pick it up later?" proposed Dwalin. "Okay, that's a good option," agreed the others. Quickly, by unanimous decision, the dwarves began to dig deep with their axes and swords, soon burying a large chest full of gold coins and jewelry. "If they already took everything they wanted, it's best to go back to camp and get some rest," Thorin said after stowing the sword in his waist, as he looked at everyone else with a serene gaze. Nodding, they all started to leave the troll cave. However, on their way back, a howl echoed in the air. Everyone's expression changed. They knew whose howl it was. You. "Damn it. Give me a break," Aldril muttered in exasperation. He hadn't had time to rest properly. Ard's signal and the fight with the trolls had tired him too much, and now they needed to run to get away from the wargs again. No doubt poor Aldril would have no time to rest. General POV. The party was ambushed by orcs in the dead of night. They fled from another group of orcs until dawn, resting briefly before facing 3 trolls. Their frustration was understandable as they heard the familiar howl. "Damn, at what point did it become night?" said Keely to himself, as he watched the bright sky turn into a dark blanket, illuminated only by the pale moonlight bathing the cold forest. "We took too long looking for the cave," Gandalf said with a frown. He was not happy with the stubbornness of the dwarves. A few hours ago he had suggested to Thorin that it was better to keep moving forward to distance themselves from the orcs, but the stubborn dwarf insisted that his party deserved to find the troll treasures. "Quickly, to the camp. Gather all you can," Thorin ordered with a grim face. He felt the wizard's piercing gaze, as if to say, "I told you so," but being the arrogant dwarf that he would not admit that Gandalf was right. Everyone understood the seriousness of the matter. Without delay they sped towards the camp, hoping not to meet any orcs along the way. Oh whoa! Oh whoa! The howls were getting closer and closer, causing palpable nervousness in the group. They knew how dangerous the wargs were, and their exhaustion only increased that danger. More howls echoed around them, revealing that this time the group of orcs was larger than the previous night. Quickly! Thorin urged the group. He knew they were tired and a confrontation would be disadvantageous. A few minutes later, the group looked off into the distance of the camp, relieved that it was still undiscovered by the orcs. However, that relief didn't last long. They watched as Shadow Star shot off like an arrow, leading the other horses into the forest. Puzzled at the behavior of Aldril's horse, they watched as a warg came out of the abandoned house, who looked vehemently at the horses, as if they were a delicious piece of meat to be devoured. "Damn, they made it to the camp. What do we do now?" said Dwalin, tightening his grip on his axe. As if on cue at his question, the warg rider, his eyes blazing with turned his gaze towards Dwalin and his companions. With a shrill cry that echoed like thunder in the night, he announced to the other orcs, the dwarves. Immediately after, several orcs mounted on wargs came running out of the hillside, their dark and menacing silhouettes illuminated by the light of the crescent moon. A trumpeting sound echoed in the night, alerting them to their location. The air was charged with the tension of impending battle, and the forest seemed to shudder at the presence of the gathering evil forces. The dwarves, with determination forged in 1,000 battles, tightened their grip on their weapons and prepared to meet the onslaught of darkness that loomed over them. "Into the forest, do not fight on open ground," shouted Gandalf in a firm, commanding voice. It was clear that it would be suicide to face the number of wargs approaching in the open. The forest would allow them to hide and attack by surprise, giving them a better chance of survival. Heeding Gandalf's words, the party moved deeper into the forest, hiding among the towering trees. The darkness of the forest enveloped them, providing a veil of protection from the sharp eyes of the orcs. Not long after, more than a dozen wargs moved deeper into the forest, in search of the dwarves. Perhaps the orcs would not see very well in the dark, but the wargs' evolved sense of smell compensated for that weakness. The group tensed as they heard the slow footsteps of the wargs approaching. They waited patiently behind the trees, waiting for the perfect opportunity to counterattack. Every muscle in their bodies was tense, ready for the impending confrontation. Watching as the group of warg passed them, Thorin shouted with fury and determination now. Slash, spash, squash, slash. At Thorin's command, the group attacked, taking the wargs by surprise. The sound of flesh being cut and shrieks of pain echoed through the silent forest, filling the air with a cacophony of battle. The fight had begun. Despite their fatigue, the dwarves demonstrated why they were selected by Thorin Oakenshield, moving nimbly and in coordination. Their axes gleamed in the darkness, finding their target with precision as they slew the wargs. Bilbo, frightened, nervous and motivated, my mood fluctuated wildly. Not long ago the group of orcs had found us. Seeing the large group of wargs, as Gandalf called them, caused my heart to race. A subtle current flowed through my body, calming all my chaotic emotions. Taking a look at the sword Aldril gave me, a feeling of bravery arose. No. This time I will not cower, I will fight bravely with my companions. I will give my best. Not knowing how to wield the sword will not be an impediment to help. I will show them what a Baggins is made of. My small size was a great advantage. It allowed me to hide next to Bofur and Bomber. The three of us were waiting patiently to attack the wargs. Now! I heard Thorin shout. His shout was the spark that sparked the fire brewing inside everyone. Without hesitation, we attacked the wargs. Bofur brought down the orc rider with an accurate blow, and Bomber finished off the warg with a precise axe to its head. I, on the other hand, buried my sword in the downed orc. Looking at the inert body of the orc, my body went numb for a few moments. I killed for the first time were my thoughts. My hands trembled, reflecting how I felt. The feeling of having taken a life, albeit in self-defense, shook me to my core. I thought I had fainted, for I could only see darkness all around me. Despair overcame me, unable to distinguish anything in the midst of the blackness, until a figure manifested itself, being the only light illuminating the darkness. That figure was Aldril. I was bewildered and frightened. As I was about to ask what was wrong, the glowing figure of Aldril looked at me and spoke words that caused a change in me. "You are capable, Bilbo," You have only to trust yourself, he said in a voice serene but full of conviction. Trust myself, I whispered. I could feel something inside me stir in resonance at those words. Memories of the dwarves ridiculing me flashed before me. I no longer wanted to be that fearful, weak-willed hobbit. I am Bilbo Baggins, and I will not allow anyone else to call me a coward, I declared with determination. At my declaration, the dark space began to slowly crumble. Small things can sometimes bring about great change, just as a simple word can change a man, I heard in a whisper as the space returned to normal. What just happened? I wondered, puzzled, only to be brought back to reality by Bofur's strong voice. Don't get distracted, Bilbo, he reminded me firmly. Oh right, we're still in a fight, I said to myself. Nodding towards Bofur in thanks, with new vigor, I accompanied Bofur and Bombur to kill another approaching warg. I am Bilbo Baggins, and I am not coward. General POV. The members of the expedition team split into two teams after the surprise attack. Thorin, along with the dwarves, formed one group, demonstrating their agility and coordination as they were led by their king. The other group consisted of Aldril and Gandalf. Both, with their great skills, were like lightning and thunder complementing each other. While Aldril used his two swords that glowed with pleasure as he slayed the orcs, Gandalf showed off his combat expertise, using his sword and staff, slaying the orcs quite easily. Slash, slash, splash. The wargs were dropping like flies despite the group's constant fatigue. The orc leader, furious at seeing them being slaughtered, pulled out his horn and blared it into the dark night, calling for reinforcements in hopes of turning the tide of the battle. Ayuyuyuyuyu. 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 The howls echoed in the distance. The orc leader, hearing the wonderful sound of the howls, flashed a cruel smile and signaled the remaining wargs to continue attacking the group. Kill them all. The orcs, mounted on the wargs, grinned sadistically at the sight of the group of dwarves breathing heavily and immediately urged their mounts to attack, imagining the scene where they slaughtered the pesky dwarves. You're too annoying, Aldril said as he drew his bow and arrow. He fixed his hawk-like gaze on the orc leader. Sensing a piercing stare, the orc turned his gaze to Aldril and gave him a smirk. Shiz. An arrow flew swiftly. The orc's sneer froze as he felt an object lodged in his head and with a thud, fell from his mount. The warg, oblivious to what happened to his rider, charged towards the pair of Aldril and Gandalf. The others, seeing their leader fall, roared with rage and charged with more fervor, shouting aloud, "Kill them!" At the impending attack, the dwarves tensed, but did not falter. Even Bilbo, though his heart was pounding, showed his courage. He clenched his sword tightly, which glowed with a dark blue light, eager to slay more orcs. His hands, though small in comparison to those of the dwarves, did not tremble, and his gaze reflected resolve. Do not falter, Thorin shouted as he braced himself against the impending attack. After a few seconds that seemed eternal, the wargs clashed fiercely with the dwarves. The clash was like thunder, echoing through the night. However, the dwarves stood their ground under the leadership of Thorin Oakenshield. Each dwarf fought hard. Axes and hammers flashed under the moon, felling the beasts that rushed against them. The wargs, though fierce, could do little. Aldril, like a skilled archer, positioned himself at the rear of the group as he slew the incoming wargs, thinning their numbers and balancing the battlefield. Head down, Bilbo! Shouted Aldril. Bilbo, without hesitation, ducked nimbly, allowing Aldril to get a sure shot at the warg that fell after the arrow embedded itself in its eye. The orc riding it fell heavily, only to be quickly killed by a slash from Bilbo. Bilbo performance surprised Aldril. Nowhere to be seen was the fearful hobbit of a month ago, now only a brave hobbit unafraid of adversity. Although unexpected, Bilbo's change was welcome. On the other hand, Gandalf, with his combat experience, recognized the value of having such an accurate archer, so he positioned himself at Aldril's side, protecting him from the wargs that came too close. Aldril, with his bow, was firing arrows that were cutting through the air with precision, knocking down enemies and protecting the dwarves' backs. However, in the midst of the frenzy, a warg managed to sneak up behind Aldril's back. With a ferocious snarl, the beast lunged at him, its jaws open and its claws ready to tear. In an instant, Gandalf acted. With a deft demonstration of his magic, he raised his staff and muttered an ancient word of power. A white flash, bright as lightning, shot from the tip of the staff and struck the warg squarely, crashing it into a tree. The creature fell to the ground, motionless, as the glow of the spell faded into darkness. I owe you one, Gandalf, Aldril said, barely turning to see what had happened. He was prepared to react to the attack, but Gandalf acted first, so he didn't think much of it and kept firing. "You owe me many," Gandalf retorted, as he slashed at an incoming orc with his sword. Aldril lethal accuracy and Gandalf's magical protection formed a fearsome duo for the orcs. In just a few minutes, almost all of the remaining wargs were decimated by the group's combined attack. Normally, faced with such situations, the orcs would run away in fright. Therein lay the reason they didn't run away. They were waiting for reinforcements. Hearing the howls getting closer and closer, Thorin's face contracted and anxiously he shouted, "Kill them before their reinforcements arrive." At Thorin's command, the dwarves charged and quickly killed the remaining orcs. Aldril accuracy sped up this process, so that only a few seconds later none of the remaining orcs were alive. Turning around, Thorin hurried the group. "Let's go, orc reinforcements to arrive will be here soon." Quickly, they all ran into the depths of the forest. "Hurry, go faster," urged Thorin. He knew they were all tired, but what else could he do? The group barely withstood this attack. As he ran, Aldril looked anxiously for Shadowstar. He feared something had happened to him, but as if on cue, Aldril caught a glimpse of Shadowstar with the other horses following him as he ran towards the group. "There! To the horses, quick!" shouted Aldril, pointing to the horses led by Shadowstar. The group, hearing Aldril shout, turned quickly in the direction he pointed and silently thanked their lucky stars. The horses, led by the majestic Shadowstar, were approaching with great speed. With renewed vigor, the dwarves raced toward the horses. Bilbo, though panting, kept up the pace. The little hobbit could not help a smile of relief at the sight of the incoming horses and his pony. Shadowstar whinnied at the sight of Aldril, and as if understanding the urgency of the situation, stopped just long enough for her owner to mount. "You're the best, you know that?" Aldril said to Shadowstar, who whinnied with pleasure but urging him to hurry. The other horses followed suit, allowing each member of the group to quickly climb onto their mounts. "Come on quickly," urged Thorin, his voice steady despite the weariness evident on his face. The group, now mounted, began to advance rapidly into the forest. They knew that orc reinforcements were not far away and that every second counted. Riding swiftly to Thorin's side, Gandalf gave him a meaningful glance. Thorin, understanding Gandalf's look, nodded reluctantly. He may not like elves, but right now he must put aside his prejudices and think of the welfare of all. "Lead the way," Thorin said to Gandalf, who hurriedly stood in front of everyone and shouted, "Follow me." General Pov. In a dark forest, where night had claimed ground, several figures could be seen riding swiftly, the branches of the trees creaking under the horses' footsteps. A pale moon peeked timidly through the clouds, briefly illuminating the tense and tired faces of the expedition group. The terrifying howl of the warg could be heard in the distance, flooding the group with nervousness. The horses, as if spurred on by the howl, sped up with more fervor, moving deeper and deeper into the forest. Half an hour later, finally, the expedition team made it out of the dark forest, being greeted by bright moonlight. Ahead of them lay a wasteland with huge boulders adorning it. The howls of the wargs could not be heard, allowing the group to breathe a sigh of relief. The horses slowly slowed down, tired from the chase and adding that they were unable to rest properly from the previous chase. Shadowstar, despite not having rested, was in perfect condition, proving how extraordinary his lineage was. "Where are we going, Gandalf?" asked one of the dwarves, with a mixture of weariness and hope in his voice. "We will go to Rivendell," Gandalf replied, his tone firm but comforting. "The elves will help us replenish our lost supplies." As he spoke, his eyes remained fixed on the north, as if he were searching for something or someone. "Shall we go ask those damned elves for help?" "I'd rather stay and fight orcs than ask an elf for help," Dwalin said with a bold face. He detested the elves with fervor. It was as if an irrational distaste for them was already implanted in his blood. "I am of the same opinion as Dwalin. I don't want to ask the elves for help," Gloin added with clear disgust in his voice. "Silence!" shouted Thorin, his voice ringing with authority. Though he shared the opinion of the others, he had no choice. The supplies had been left behind after the sudden orc attack, and he endured the displeasure for the sake of the group. Ignoring the displeasure of the dwarves, Aldril rode alongside Gandalf and asked, "How long will it take us to reach Rivendell?" He was excited. Something inside him urged him on. It was a cozy feeling, the same feeling one feels when arriving home after a hard day. "At noon, if there is no trouble," Gandalf replied without taking his eyes off the front. He knew that this moor was the border of elven territory, and that sooner or later they would encounter a scouting party. The orcs would not be stupid enough to cross the border of elven territory. They would be safe on this moor, allowing them to loosen up their already tense bodies a bit. We should keep alert until then, he added. It's dawn, warned Ori, pointing to the horizon, where the brightness of the sun was rising majestically, gradually illuminating the dark moor and bringing joy to the dwarves. With the sunlight, the orcs would not pursue them, for the orcs detested the sun. The dwarves smiled as they felt the first rays of sunshine on their faces, grateful for the brief respite granted by nature. A new day, Thorin murmured, allowing himself a brief moment of relief. I hope it all goes well, he whispered. But as if fate was spitting in their faces, a group of wargs suddenly emerged from the forest, rushing towards them. The orcs riding the wargs didn't mind the sunlight. It certainly made them very uncomfortable, but their ferocity prevented them from turning and running away. They wanted to murder the dwarf bastards at any cost. Turning at the loud sound of footsteps, Keely watched in surprise as the wargs rapidly approached them. Damn it! Orcs! He shouted in frustration. At Keely's sudden shout, they all turned their heads and immediately their faces changed from relaxed to tense. The number of enemies in front of them reached at least 60 wargs, far more than they could handle. Quick! Quicken! Shouted Gandalf, urging his horse to gallop faster. Though tired, the horses gave their all, knowing that, if they did not run, they would be slain by these ferocious beasts. The group sped forward, the sound of hooves echoing against the rocky terrain. The wargs were rapidly approaching, their snarls filling the air with palpable menace. The orcs mounted on them snarled and roared, waving their weapons in the air. Kill the dwarves! Quickly! Growled an orc. He wanted to assassinate these bastards that killed several of his group. He didn't want to let them get away once again. So this time he would do anything to get the head of these bastards. We can't let them catch up with us, cried Thorin, gritting his teeth as his horse strained to the utmost. The dwarves now clung to their mounts in desperation. They will catch up with us. We must fight, shouted Dwalin, clinging with all his remaining strength to his horse. He would rather die in battle than be killed as he fled. Gandalf looked up, scanning the horizon with hope palpable in his eyes. We cannot afford another battle, he shouted. Despite finding himself tired and sleepy, Aldril drew his bow and arrow. With determination he began to shoot. Thanks to his level with the bow, he could afford to shoot while riding. He was now very focused, not underestimating the enemy. He knew they could dodge his arrows, so he was not confident like 2 nights ago where he was almost killed by a warg. Shish 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 shish. 3 wargs were killed. Seeing 3 of their comrades slain, the orcs roared with fury and charged with more vehemence. Just when it seemed that the group would be overtaken, a new sound was heard in the distance. The clear, resounding blast of a horn. Turu! From the nearby hills, a group of elven riders appeared, descending with grace and speed. The elves of Rivendell lunged towards the wargs with calm and lethal precision. The elven arrows flew through the air, striking the wargs before they could react. The elves, mounted on their sleek horses, moved with perfect timing, demonstrating how well entered they were. Let there be none left, commanded an elf of unearthly beauty, with dark hair falling in waves to his shoulders. With one fluid motion he fired an arrow, piercing the orc leader's body. Within minutes, the elves had significantly reduced the number of wargs. The beasts, seeing themselves outnumbered and without effective leadership, began to retreat, cowardly fleeing into the forest. The group breathed a sigh of relief as they saw the wargs fleeing. You must understand that they had been without proper sleep for 2 nights, and including that they had been fighting without hardly any rest for a long time. First against the orcs, then against the trolls, and again against the orcs. Breathing a sigh of relief, the dwarves tensed up as they were surrounded by the elves, who did not look kindly upon them. It was at that moment that the elf who seemed to be the leader approached Gandalf and with a friendly tone said, "May go Vanan Mithrandir," he greeted, bowing his head slightly. "We arrived just in time, it seems." "Your help has been providential, Eladan," Gandalf replied, visibly relieved. "We have been on the run for so long and find ourselves exhausted. We would not withstand another attack." "Rivendell awaits you," the elf said, pointing eastward. "We are here to make sure you arrive safely." Thorin, looking bold-faced and with displeasure evident on his face, merely nodded and followed the elves. Certainly many events had occurred that had exhausted them mentally, and they needed a well-deserved rest. Breathing a sigh of relief, Aldril put away his bow and followed the elves. However, he felt someone's penetrating gaze. Turning to the direction of the gaze, he met the surprised eyes of the black-haired elf. The expression of recognition on his face puzzled him, for he could not recall ever having seen that elf before. The elf slowly approached and said, "Excuse me my staring, but I think I know you from somewhere," the elf said, his voice soft and melodious. "Have you been to Rivendell before?" Aldril hesitated for a moment, surprised by the elf's question. "No, I've never been to Rivendell before," Aldril replied, trying to hide his confusion. The elf seemed to ponder for a moment before shaking his head with a smile. "My apologies then, it must be a coincidence. But your face looks curiously familiar. Anyway, welcome to the lands of Rivendell. I hope you find peace and rest here." "Thank you," Aldril replied, even with confusion evident on his face. "Why the hell do I feel familiarity with this elf?" he wondered. Aldril POV. A feeling of familiarity welled up inside me. It was as if this elf and I were related, adding another unanswered question to the many I had. I was getting tired of this. I felt like I would explode emotionally. Fortunately, we would soon reach Rivendell. Something deep inside me told me that in that place I would find all the answers. I was anxious to get there, plus I needed a proper rest, and what better way than to rest in a bed made by elves? Surely they would be very comfortable, I thought, as I rode beside Gandalf. We rode together for a few minutes until I remembered what the elf had said a few moments ago. I turned to look at him and curiously asked, "Did they know we were going to Rivendell? Also, why did they call you Mithrandir, Grey Pilgrim?" With amazement written all over his face, Gandalf looked at me and asked, "Do you understand the Elvish language?" Curiosity was clearly reflected on his face, without answering my questions. They were speaking Elvish? Shit, now what do I say? I thought. My mind worked quickly until I came up with a simple solution. I put on a puzzled face and said, "Were they speaking Elvish?" To tell you the truth, even I didn't know I could speak it. At my reply, Gandalf was silent, but I could see a lot of doubt in his eyes, which looked at me as if he wanted to see inside me and find out all my secrets. Looking away from me, Gandalf gave a sigh and looked straight ahead. Apparently, my puzzled face convinced him that I really didn't know the reason. Forget it. If even you don't know, I won't know the answer either. And to answer your questions, I had encountered an elven scouting party when I separated from the group. I told them that I would take Thorin Oakenshield expedition team to Rivendell and that I hoped Lord Elrond would give us shelter. As for my name, I have traveled many places in Middle-earth, so I have had many names over time, Mithrandir to the elves, Tharkin to the dwarves, Incanus to the southerners, and in these parts one am known as Gandalf. "It sure is a pain in the butt to have so many names," I said as I laughed lightly. This was something I was unaware of. I always wondered why in the movies the elves called him Mithrandir, while with the men it was Gandalf the Grey. Now I know why. Giving a sigh of exasperation, Gandalf shook his head slowly and said, "It tends to be a nuisance at times to introduce myself by different names depending on where I am." "It sure is. So what's your real name?" I asked curiously. I remembered that in my past life, being Jonathan, a coworker who was a Lord of the Rings fan told me that Gandalf wasn't his real name. When I asked him what it was, the bastard told me I should read the books to find out. With a mysterious smile, Gandalf looked at me and shook his head before saying, "You can call me Gandalf the Grey or Mithrandir, since you understand the Elvish language." I knew he didn't want to tell me his real name, and I respected that. We've barely known each other for months, and I doubt we've built up enough trust for him to tell me if it's so important to him. Although I don't understand what's wrong with telling me his name, I thought. Shrugging, I didn't pursue the subject any further. The rest of the ride was uneventful. Without the adrenaline of being chased by orcs, our bodies relaxed, and tiredness overcame us. We didn't talk the whole way. Exhaustion had done its thing, and we could barely stay awake. However, sleep did not stop me from admiring the nature around me. The road to Rivendell was full of natural beauty, with majestic trees, green leaves swaying gently in the wind, grasslands teeming with life, and every now and then, an animal could be seen stopping to watch us. Yes, a most beautiful environment. As we moved forward, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and calm. The elves escorting us were having a gentle conversation with each other, their melodic and soothing voices blended in with the surroundings. Finally, as we rounded a final bend in the path, Rivendell unfolded before our eyes. It was so beautiful that sleep took a step back and allowed us to admire such beauty. The Valley of Rivendell was a masterpiece of nature and elvish architecture, with its buildings elegantly integrated into the landscape, surrounded by green hills and waterfalls that fell in harmony with the environment, as if time itself had stopped to preserve the beauty and serenity of this beautiful place. At the entrance to Rivendell, we were greeted by the warm welcome of Elrond, who lay elegantly and majestically with several guards around him. The sense of familiarity I had felt intensified as I stood in his presence, especially when he met my gaze. I could see his body go static for a few seconds. It was as if he had seen a lost relative. His eyes shone with a mixture of joy and nostalgia, and I could read his lips when, in a whisper, he said, "Elrose." Then he pulled himself together and smiled politely at all of us as he opened his arms, inviting us to approach. "Welcome to Rivendell," Elrond said with a gentle smile. "Here you may rest from your hectic journey." The elven leaders who led us quickly got off their horses and joined Elrond's side. Thorin, being the leader of the expedition, stepped forward and with a nod said, "I thank you on behalf of my people." Still smiling, Elrond looked at Thorin and in his melodious voice said, "Thorin, son of Thrain, I have heard of your plight and understand the burden of your journey." As if his hatred of elves was stimulated by Elrond's words, Thorin's face grew serious and in a cold voice he said, "An elf cannot understand the burden of my journey." At Thorin's tone, all the other dwarves grew serious and tensed their bodies. Elrond looked at Thorin and in Elvish said, "All dwarves are the same, stubborn and aggressive." Clearly Gandalf and I were the only ones who understood Lord Elrond's words. But the dwarves, not understanding the language, quickly became defensive, believing they had insulted Thorin. "Are you insulting us?" asked Dwalin sharply, as he picked up his axe. At the dwarf's behavior, the elven guards drew their weapons to protect Elrond. I could see the group of dwarves tense up as they watched the elves draw their swords. They were preparing for a possible confrontation. Gandalf, seeing that the situation was not good, immediately stepped into the middle of the two groups and turned his gaze to the dwarves. "No. Lord Elrond said that we seem to be exhausted and need to rest." Hearing Gandalf's explanation, all the dwarves understood, but they were still upset with the elves. After the little mishap, we were all led into Rivendell. Gandalf and Lord Elrond led the way, followed by the elven guards. As we climbed the stairs, I caught a glimpse of the beautiful elves. They were extremely beautiful and their presence was almost ethereal. We clearly attracted attention, as it is not often that we see a group of dwarves in elven territory. As we moved forward, the dwarves' whispers reached my ears, causing me to wryly smile at the rude comments they were making. Apparently, their weariness had worn off, for they were talking non-stop. "Elves are too thin," Dwalin commented disdainfully. "Yes, the cheekbones are too high, not enough facial hair and the skin is too smooth," Ori added, shaking his head. "Tall, thin, fleshless. Clearly my wife is more beautiful," Gloin said with a tone of superiority, puffing out his chest with pride. "Shame on you," commented Bilbo, who stood next to me. I could see how he covered his face with his hands, embarrassed at the dwarves' impudence. I patted Bilbo on the shoulder and said with a smile, "You should know by now how brazen they are, Bilbo. Remember they emptied your larder without asking you." At my comment, Bilbo clenched his fists tightly. "It's true, they have no decency. They are very rude when they are mere guests," he replied, frowning. As I laughed lightly at the sight of Bilbo getting angry, two elf girls walked gracefully past us. I turned to look at them and they looked back at me. They gave me a soft but beautiful smile, a charming smile, and then waved at me in greeting. As I returned their greeting, they smiled even more charmingly. No woman in my previous life could compare to these beauties. Letting out a sigh, I looked ahead. How beautiful Rivendell is. Aldril POV, apparently, Rivendell had some kind of magic that helped us recover. Upon arrival, we were all very tired, but as we took a step onto the bridge, our bodies began to recover quickly. The fatigue that plagued us began to slowly disappear. "It's amazing," Dwalin commented, stretching his arms and moving his shoulders as if he had awakened from a long sleep. "I feel like I could fight a horde of orcs right now." "Me too," Balin replied, a relieved smile on his face. "This land is really special. I've never experienced anything like it." "Ha! What's so special about it?" "Surely, it's because we dwarves recover so quickly that we no longer feel fatigue," Ori commented, replying to Dwalin and Balin's comments. I began to ignore them when they started talking nonsense. It was clear that this was elven magic, but they, in their stubbornness, kept denying it. I even saw Bilbo turn to look at them in a contemptuous manner. This surprised me. Unlike the plot of the movie, Bilbo had begun to change in just a month. He steeled himself to face the wargs, and I could even see resolve in his eyes. Were these changes because of my intervention? Either way, they are welcome. I like this Bilbo better. As we were guided, I gazed in wonder at the huge gardens, the elven architecture, the minimalist decorations. Everything was beautiful. Passing through these gardens, I felt at home. The nature of Rivendell embellished everything, created an atmosphere of serenity and peace. The brightly colored flowers, arranged with care and harmony. All around us, the elves watched us with interest and a mixture of curiosity. It was evident that they were not used to seeing so many dwarves in their home, but they welcomed us with kindness and courtesy. We were led into a large open-air dining hall, where long tables were set with an elvish feast. There was fresh fruit, freshly baked bread, fish, and a variety of different fruit wines. The banquet was accompanied by a harmonious melody played by beautiful elven women, whose melodies and skills with instruments created a symphony that echoed throughout the large dining room, bringing with it a cozy atmosphere. The music was as enchanting as a lullaby sung by a loving mother. I was a little surprised to see fish, since I thought that elves were only vegetarians. Well, not everything was shown in the movies. Maybe elves also like fish in addition to fruits and vegetables. "You may sit down and enjoy the feast I have prepared," Lord Elrond said, causing the other dwarves to rush to sit down and enjoy the feast. Though he doubted they would enjoy it entirely, as they tend to prefer a lot of meat and few vegetables and fruits. Perhaps the fish would satiate them a little. I, on the other hand, had no problem eating fruits and vegetables. I had always liked to eat a balanced diet of fruit, vegetables, and meat. As I was about to sit down next to the dwarves, Lord Elrond stopped me and urged me to sit next to him. "Young adventurer, I would like you to join us at the head table," he said, looking at me with a mixture of affection and familiarity. This surprised me a bit, but I quickly pulled myself together. "Sure, I'd be honored to eat next to you," I graciously accepted. As I sat down at the head table, I took a seat next to Gandalf, who gave me an approving look. As I enjoyed my meal, I watched as the group of dwarves grumbled in disgust at all the vegetables. As they pushed them aside and ate all the fish, out of the corner of my eye I saw Lord Elrond smirk. It seems that even Lord Elrond likes to make fun of dwarves, I thought with a small grin. After we finished eating and with our stomachs satisfied, the dining room was filled with light conversation. I could see Gandalf approach Elrond, and after saying something to him in a low voice, he drew the sword we had found in the troll cave, placing it carefully in Elrond's hands. Lord Elrond took the sword with an expression of interest, observing it for a moment before drawing it gracefully. The light from the spot made the blade gleam, revealing ancient and beautiful inscriptions. Elrond studied the inscription beneath the hilt and, after a brief silence, spoke slowly. "This sword is Glamdring, Hammer of Enemies. It was wielded by King Turgon of Gondolin." Gracefully he returned it to its sheath and handed it back to Gandalf, who seemed pleased to hear the origin of his sword. Seizing that moment, I spoke as respectfully as possible. "Excuse me, Lord Elrond, may you inspect my swords as well?" I asked as I untied the sheaths of my swords, Anglical and Anguirel, and placed them carefully on the table. Elrond looked at me with a mixture of surprise and interest. He nodded gently and took Anglical first, deftly unsheathing it. The black blade reflected a faint dark light, showing its dark beauty and power. Elrond ran his eyes over every detail of the blade, his eyes shining with recognition and awe. "Anglical," he murmured. "A blade forged by the Grateful, the Dark Elf. This sword is known for its strength and for its tumultuous history. It was later renamed by Turin as Gurthang. I can feel a strong rejection, as if he did not want me to wield it, a magnificent sword." Returning Anglical to its sheath, Elrond then took Anguirel, the sister of the first sword. He unsheathed it with equal care, noting the inscriptions and texture of the blade. Anguirel, also forged by Ol, there was a prophecy that he who bears the twin sisters will prevent the darkness from spreading. "Besides that it was the sword wielded by my dear niece Tindamil," Elrond murmured, subsequently putting the sword away and handing them back to me. "These swords are strongly linked to you." There was a brief silence. I was amazed by the swords. I only knew their names, but not by whom they were forged. I should ask permission to enter his library and read more about these swords. As I was putting the swords back on, Lord Elrond surprised me with his request. "Young adventurer, I would like to speak privately with you," he said to me, as he invited me to get up and follow him. Giving Gandalf a glance, I could see his face pucker with confusion, only to shrug and continue drinking wine. With a sigh to myself, I stood up and followed Lord Elrond. I could feel my heart pounding with anticipation. Something inside me told me that I would soon find the answers to all my questions. Guided by Lord Elrond, we passed through sunlit corridors, which gave a view of absolute beauty. The elvish architecture, with its elegant and natural forms, seemed to be in perfect harmony with the surroundings. Soon we entered a room where finely cared portraits of different people stood. Their faces, though unfamiliar to me, conveyed a strange sense of familiarity. What's going on? Where is he taking me? I wondered. I followed him until he stopped in front of one of the portraits, a painting of a beautiful woman with black hair, honey-colored eyes, and a beautiful delicate face, as if it had been carved by angels. The expression on her face radiated tranquility, adorned with a smile capable of captivating any man. Tears welled up in my eyes uncontrollably, and no matter how hard I tried to hold them back, they seemed to have a life of their own. I was overwhelmed by the intensity of my own feelings, mixed with memories of the old Aldril. With slow, trembling steps, I approached the woman portrait. I felt an instant connection with her image, as if her presence resonated deep within me. My fingers trembled as they caressed the canvas, as if I could feel her soft skin and warm embrace at that moment. Lord Elrond, with his usual calm and serenity, came to my side, his eyes full of understanding and empathy. "She is Tindamil, my niece and—" Before he could finish his sentence, I interrupted him, letting out between sobs the words that weighed heavy on my heart. "She's my mom," I said between sobs. Aldril POV. As I looked at the portrait, I felt an emotional dam inside me break, and all the emotions I didn't know I had repressed began to flow freely. It was as if my heart had been holding back an ocean of feelings, and now, in front of my mother image, those waters overflowed uncontrollably. The longing to know her, to be cared for by her, all mixed together in a chaotic storm that I could barely comprehend. The tears fell unceasingly, each one laden with memories and emotions I didn't know I had. It was as if my soul was releasing everything it had silently accumulated over the years. My legs were shaking, and I could barely stand. Each sob was a reflection of the intensity of the pain I felt. Unbidden, I dropped to my knees in front of the portrait, my hands clutching the edge of the frame as if it could anchor me to reality. "Why?" I murmured between sobs, my words barely audible. "Why don't I remember her? Why do I feel this deep pain? Why did I instinctively know she was my mother?" Everything was so chaotic, yet amidst the chaos I found many answers to my countless questions. The greatest discovery was knowing that I did not transmigrate, but reincarnated into this world. It was as if seeing my mother portrait was a wind that dispersed the fog that prevented me from seeing beyond. I now knew that, as I fell from the waterfall, the strong emotions I felt at the danger of death stimulated my soul, allowing the memories of my past life, stored in my soul, to bloom like flowers in spring. It was liberating. I finally understood why the more time passed the more I felt an inexplicable connection to this world that I now knew was truly my home, my second life, one more chance to live. While everything in me was in chaos, Lord Elrond, or you could say my great-uncle, knelt beside me. His hand rested gently on my shoulder, bringing me comfort. In a calm and understanding voice he said, "How do you intuitively know it is your mother? Sometimes the heart remembers what the mind has forgotten. It's like a newborn baby, it instinctively knows who its mother is." I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the sobs that shook my body. I felt the warmth of the sun filtering through the windows, bathing the room in golden light. Despite the emotional storm, that light seemed to offer me a glimmer of peace, as if my mother was watching me and comforting me. Elrond's words echoed in my mind. It was true, there was something in my heart that recognized the woman in the portrait, something deeper than mere memories. It was an instinctive recognition, a bond that overcame time. "It's hard to explain," I finally murmured, wiping away my tears with the back of my hand. From the moment I saw her face, I knew who she was. Elrond nodded, his gaze full of understanding. "Our connections are different from those of other races. Instinctively, we will always seek to be with our family." "Did you not feel Rivendell calling you?" he asked softly. Rising awkwardly on shaky legs, I nodded. "When we went into the forest, I felt a great call to this place," I said, then asked, "Why did you bring me here, Lord Elrond? Did you know who I was when you saw me?" Elrond removed his hand from my shoulder and nodded. "Follow me," he said as he walked to another portrait. This portrait was of a man much like Elrond, with chiseled jaw and straight black hair falling over his shoulders. I was strikingly similar to him, except that I had my mother's eyes and darker hair. "This is Elrose, my twin brother and your grandfather," Elrond explained in a nostalgic tone. "When I first saw you, it was as if I went back in time and saw my brother in his youth. The magic of my elven blood told me that you were a relative of mine, and your eyes were the last piece of the puzzle as to whose son you were," he said as he looked at the portrait wistfully and sadly. I was silent, taking in his words. I looked at the portrait of my grandfather Elrose, feeling a mixture of awe. The revelation of my lineage left me extremely surprised. A memory of a month ago in my talk with Balin came to my mind when I heard the name Elrose Tindamil, daughter of Elrose the first king of Numenor, but something did not add up. "Lord Elrond, pardon my question, but wasn't King Elrose human? How is he your brother if you are an elf? And if my mother was the daughter of Elrose, why does she look like an elf?" I asked, confused and a little embarrassed. At my question, Elrond turned and gave me a sympathetic smile. "You're my family, young Aldril. You can just call me Elrond or Uncle. As for your question, it will take a while to explain. Why don't we go sit down?" He said as he gestured with his hand, pointing to a table outside the room in a garden. As we settled into the garden, several elven servants brought us fruit and wine to accompany our conversation. Elrond and I sat on a finely carved marble bench, surrounded by vibrantly colored flowers. Our conversation began when Elrond spoke of our ancestor. It all begins with our ancestor Tuor, who arrived in Gondolin after spending many penumbras. After spending 7 years in Gondolin, he fell in love with Idril Celebrindel, daughter of Gondolin ruler Turgon. Their love was reciprocated, and after some time, they married. Their union gave birth to a son named Erendil, who is in turn my father and your grandfather. My father was a Paradhill, a being with elven and human blood, a half-elf. They and their descendants are allowed to choose which destiny they will take, either the destiny of elven immortality or the mortal destiny of men. As time passed, my father found his love in Elwing the Beautiful, also a half-elf, who in turn is my precious mother. With her he had 2 sons, myself and my brother Elrose. Both my father and mother chose the fate of the elves after asking the Vala for help in defeating Morgoth. In time, my brother and I grew up and were presented with the choice of which destiny we would choose. I chose the fate of elves and my brother chose the fate of men. However, only first and second generation descendants have the option to choose their destiny. But your mother was an exception. Her great exploits in Middle-earth as an adventurer drew the attention of the great Vala, Varda, mistress of the stars. So much so that he blessed her and allowed her to be an exception. Thus, your mother had the choice of which destiny to choose, and, as you can imagine, she took the destiny of the elves. With her chosen destiny, your mother bravely faced the dark forces of Sauron for a long time. She was so awesome and powerful that on many occasions she stood face to face against Sauron. Every battle they fought shaped the land, as if they were natural disasters. In many battles she caused Sauron to retreat. She was one of the main people in the fall of the kingdom of Angmar. She was the pillar of light that brought and maintained hope to all races. In the Battle of the Last Alliance, your mother together with Isildur defeated Sauron. However, in that battle your mother was wounded with Sauron's dark magic. At first it did not cause great harm and we thought we had healed her. However, after her pregnancy, the dark magic resurfaced and severely affected your mother. By the 8th month of pregnancy, your mother was in Lothlorien with Galadriel and my wife. On her return to Rivendell, your mother gave birth to you. However, a moment that should be one of happiness was marred by an orc ambush. My wife was kidnapped, while your mother was severely injured due to her not being in optimal condition from pregnancy and dark magic. According to my men, I was told that when they were about to murder you, a beautiful glowing white bird rescued you and led you away from the battle. However, we were never able to track your whereabouts. Your mother, in her depression over losing you, wanted to give in to dark magic. We did everything to keep her alive. One night, your mother visited me and claimed she had a vision in which you and older me met a gray wizard. I immediately guessed the identity of the magician. I knew that sooner or later you would return to your family. Your mother clung to that hope, but the black magic overcame my healing art. So we had to send her and my wife to Valinor to recover. Your mother said she would go to any length to return after she was healed, all to see him again, he beloved son. With all that said, Elrond drank some wine, as he felt a little dry throat. As for me, I was completely in shock. So many events were happening and I was not in my best state. I needed a place alone to sort out everything that happened today. Only a few words I could say. Thank you, Uncle Elrond, for being here, for helping me understand. I felt mentally weak. Observing my state, Elrond smiled at me with tenderness and understanding. He knew I needed to sort out my thoughts. I will always be here for you, Aldril. Now, take your time to process all of this. Rivendell is your home, he said, then asked an elven servant to take me to a room. Right now I was in a soft bed, with an arm across my forehead. The events of the day I let out a sigh as I closed my eyes and thought about everything that happened today, until I suddenly opened my eyes. With everything that happened, I forgot to ask who my father was. Letting out another sigh, I settled on the bed to take a nap. I'll ask tomorrow. Right now I need a nap to calm down. With that last said, I allowed Morpheus to take me into his dream territory. Gandalf POV. A few hours earlier Gandalf enjoyed the hospitality of the elves. The fact that Elrond had taken Aldril with him puzzled him a little, but if he wanted to speak to him alone, it must be for something important. He vaguely sensed what they would talk about, for when they reached Rivendell, Elrond stood still for a few seconds at the sight of Aldril. Perhaps the others did not notice, but he did, and Elrond stared at Aldril for a few seconds and muttered his late brother's name, Elros. This gave Gandalf a vague idea of who Aldril was. He knew that the young adventurer was no ordinary person. He shook his head slightly to dispel those thoughts. There would be an opportunity in the future to ask what Elrond talked about with Aldril. Gandalf sipped happily at a glass of fruit wine, enjoying the drink and the coolness it offered to his parched throat. Enjoying his drink, he turned to watch what the dwarves were doing. At that precise moment, he saw the young dwarf Keely looking from side to side, as if afraid of being watched. Realizing that no one was paying attention to him, he picked up a beautifully crafted silver goblet and quickly hid it in his clothes. This scene, combined with his words to Lord Elrond that the dwarves of the expedition were honorable, upright, polite, made him cough several times, almost choking on the wine. Cough, cough, cough. These silly, greedy dwarves. Good thing no one but me managed to catch the petty theft. After the meal I'll force that glass back, he thought with a hint of irritation on his face. It was at that moment that a noise made him look at the other table, where he could see how the dwarves were banging their knives and forks against the plates, making a melody, and then Keely, Philly, Ori, Gloin got on the tables and started to sing. The peaceful atmosphere provided by the elves went down the drain. The elves playing the musical instruments stopped and glared at the behavior of the dwarves. With a hand to his forehead, Gandalf regretted saying those words about the dwarves. It was clear that these bastards were the opposite of what he had described to Lord Elrond. Hee. Thorin's jovial laughter caused Gandalf to give him a look which conveyed unspoken words. These dwarves caused him to let out an exasperated sigh. "Oh great Varda, why are dwarves like that?" he muttered as he shook his head. Bilbo was no worse than Gandalf. The little hobbit could be seen covering his face as he muttered, "What a shame and lack of manners, why did I join this lot?" As the hours passed, the bright and welcoming sunlight gave way to the dark and quiet night. With the coming of night, all of Rivendell was illuminated with lamps that enhanced the already beautiful valley, giving it an even more enchanting sight. Waking from his short nap, Aldril noticed that it was night, which surprised him a little. "Did I sleep long?" "Well, it was reasonable. Everything I went through made my body and mind scream for a rest," he muttered as he got up and headed to the bathroom to take a shower in the already prepared bathtub. Apparently, they had already prepared it, but is it magic that keeps the water warm? He wondered as he reached into the water and felt the warm temperature. Anyway, I don't want to think about that for now. With that last said, he undressed, stepped into the tub and let out a sigh of relief as he felt the perfect temperature of the water, allowing him to relax completely. The steam rose in gentle wisps, enveloping him in a cozy atmosphere that soothed his tense muscles and cleared his still turbulent mind. A few minutes later Aldril came out of his room and wanted to explore the surroundings while thinking about all that he had discovered about himself, and as he explored, he marveled at the new look the lamps gave Rivendell. Night had enveloped the valley in a blanket of tranquility. The soft lights of the lamps adorned the corridors, conveying a cozy atmosphere. The gardens glowed in the soft glow of the moon, making the flowers and trees seem almost magical under the starry sky. The constant sound of water running through the water fountains provided a soothing melody, as if nature itself was openly showing you how wonderful it could be. Reaching a balcony that offered a panoramic view of the valley, Aldril paused to take in the scenery. Leaning back on the balcony, Aldril watched as the stars sparkled like jewels in the dark sky, and the full moon shed its light. As Aldril gazed at the stars in a forest east of the misty mountains, an elf of extreme beauty, with reddish-brown hair that cascaded in undulating cascades to her waist, a fine, delicate face with curves that would charm any man who looked upon it, stood high in a tree, gazing up at the starry sky. As if fate itself intertwined them, their views parted in a straight line, dividing Aldril face to the left and to the right the face of the beautiful elf. "How beautiful the sky looks tonight / how beautiful the sky looks tonight," they both said in unison. The song already written changed their scores by a mighty divine power, changing the destiny of both. Once again the union between an elf and a parrot hill would be allowed. As this happened, the elf instinctively looked towards Rivendell, while Aldril looked towards the Black Forest, both with indescribable emotions. An elf of indescribable beauty, with golden hair, long and shining, tall and elegant, with a presence that exuded wisdom and power, stood gazing into the distance at Aldril. "It is a surprise that you have been allowed to leave Valinor, my lady," he said with a smile to the woman of great beauty, with dark hair and shining eyes who stood beside him watching Aldril. "It is. My granddaughter Tindamil won the sympathy of Lady Varda, who spoke to Her Majesty Manwë and allowed one of us to return sporadically to observe my great-grandson. I was the most suitable because of my blessing. My granddaughter begged me to look after her son until he met the Grey Wizard. For that very reason, this will be the last time I will be in Middle-earth," the elf said with a wistful smile as she looked at Aldril. "Then you will not pay your son a visit, my lady?" the elf said quietly, glancing sideways at the elf. "That I will do before I return to Valinor," the elf replied as she smiled softly, further enhancing her beauty. Noting that Aldril was heading towards one of the gardens, the elf looked at the elf. "This will be my last night in Middle-earth. I have to give you a gift that Arendelle asked me to give to our great-grandson," she said before she started walking towards the same garden. "It was good to see you again, my Lady Elwing," the elf said as he bowed his head slightly. "Likewise, Glorfindel," Elwing replied as she advanced with grace and elegance. Aldril POV, what was that feeling? I said to myself, a few moments ago as I gazed at the stars. A sudden warmth came over me, and I heard next to me a whisper with the same words I had spoken, but this voice was melodious and delicate, like that of a woman. Sighing, I shook my head slightly. I'd better get back, I thought, picking up the way I had come. I stopped for a few moments in the garden, as this place brought me a lot of calm, plus it doesn't hurt to observe its beauty for a few moments. Sitting on the edge of the fountain, footsteps behind me caught my attention. Turning around, I froze when I saw the person who raised me. "Grandma," I said excitedly as I quickly stood up and ran over to her to give her a hug. "Even though you're older, you still act like a child," she said warmly as she accepted my hug. Her eyes shone with the same tenderness I remembered from my childhood, and the warmth of her presence filled me with nostalgia and joy. "I can't believe you're here," I said, unable to contain my excitement. "Why did you leave? Or rather, what are you doing here, Grandma?" "Hee, you still have a habit of asking a lot of questions, my boy," she said to me as she laughed lightly. "I imagine Elrond already told you about who you are, didn't he?" I nodded as I slowly pulled away from our embrace. I know I am behaving like a child, but I can't help it. This woman was with me when I needed it most. She is the light that illuminated my dark loneliness. "Well, my child, then let me show you who I really am," she said, as her took a few steps back, and with a strong glow a beautiful young woman with black hair and glowing eyes in an elegant dark cloak lay in front of me. What happened? I thought, taking a few steps back in surprise. I remembered seeing this woman's face in one of the portraits my Uncle Elrond showed me. "From your eyes I can see that you recognize me, and you are right. I am your great-grandmother Elwing. I used a little elven magic to change my appearance. Plus I am also the bird that has been taking care of you," she said while smiling warmly at me. I was puzzled. Fortunately this time I was able to cope better with the situation. I'm not surprised anymore. So much has happened to me in these few days that if my mother appeared out of nowhere, I wouldn't be surprised, I said as I laughed lightly. Maybe I was able to cope better with the situation thanks to the calm I felt being with my grandmother, or should I say great-grandmother. "I can understand that, my child. This time I present myself in my true form, as this may be the last time we see each other, unless you choose a fate other than man," she said as she slowly approached me and placed her hand on my cheek. "I have a gift from your great-grandfather," she added, placing an eagle-shaped brooch with a green stone embedded in the center on my chest. It was very elegant and looked imposing. "This is the Elisar stone. It will protect you from the future dangers you will face. It was once worn by your great-grandfather and helped him survive on many occasions. Now it will belong to you. It will never fall, so don't be afraid to fight with it," he continued. She gently took his hands away from the brooch and looked at me with that fondness I remembered seeing in his eyes. Then she took off the cloak she was wearing and placed it gently in my arms. "This cloak belonged to your mother. She asked me to give it to you when you were on your journey. It will protect you from all weathers and allow you to hide in the dark." "Thank you, grandmother," I said as small tears formed in my eyes. "I swear I will not let you down. I will defeat all evil that comes my way with my words spoken." My hair shone like the starry sky. Seeing my hair shining slightly, my grandmother smiled even more charmingly. "Your mother was not wrong to name you Aldril, Ancient Glow. You will shine like the ancient Telperion and Laurelin," she said with grace and elegance. She gave me a kiss on my forehead, which relaxed me and released a huge emotional charge I still felt. With his characteristic charming smile, he stepped back. "Have a safe journey, my child. May the great Varda bless you, as she blessed your mother," she said. With that said, a strong light illuminated the garden, blinding me temporarily. Then I looked up at the sky and saw the same beautiful glowing bird I remembered so well. I felt an enormous sadness as I watched it leave. With a deep breath in and out, I pulled myself together. "I will not disappoint them, and to do that I must become stronger," I said as I watched out of the corner of my eye as my system glowed and changed slightly. Name: Aldril, Ancient Glow. Race: Human Elf, Paradhill. Attribute points: 7. It's time to raise attributes. General POV. It was a surprise that killing the trolls gave him 7 points, but it was definitely a pleasant surprise. Right now, he was eager to distribute these points and level up the attributes that were lacking. Name: Aldril, Ancient Shining. Race: Human Elf, Paradhill. Attribute points: 7. Attribute: Strength level 1. Constitution plus. Agility level 1. Mentality plus. Skill: Universal Language. Military Survival level 2. Wolf School Style level 2. Archery level 2. Talent: Good Fingers. Special skill: Mentality is a priority at the moment, as it has been shown that under great pressure and stress, his performance can drop significantly. This was demonstrated during the orc chase and when he felt mentally unstable upon learning of his lineage. Aware of this, Aldril decided to invest points in his mental attribute. Mentality to Mentality level 1. Mentality level 1. Attribute points: 6. A warm current spread throughout Aldril's body. A cool feeling like when you eat a mint spread through his head, freeing him from his chaotic thoughts that still plagued him, bringing him peace and making him breathe a sigh of relief. "Phew, this feeling is intoxicating," Aldril said to himself as he closed his eyes, enjoying the moment. This feeling was very pleasant. The weight of his worries melted away, leaving him with a sense of clarity and balance. Slowly opening his eyes, Aldril, now with a clear mind, focused his attention on the attribute of Constitution. He knew that this attribute would be crucial in overcoming his physical limits. Not only would Constitution give him greater physical endurance, but it would also improve his ability to recover from wounds and resist disease. Constitution to Constitution level 1. Attribute points: 5. From his great-grandmother vague words, he sensed that the stone would be useful for healing, plus he could sense that it was more in tune with nature, perhaps druid abilities, he said quietly. He shook his head slightly. "We'll see later what I can do with it." He had 5 attribute points left. "I can level up my bow skill weight, as this would be useful for his future confrontation against Smog, although it would be advisable to level up the other attributes as well. But would it be possible to get more points? As far as Aldril could remember, they would only face the mountain goblins and the spider group later on. He wasn't sure he would get attribute points. A feeling told him that from now on it would be more difficult to get points. To hell with this, I'll raise my bow skill. With that thought, he invested the 5 points in the bow skill. Archery level 2 to Archery level 3. Attribute points: 0. Phew, another sigh escaped his lips. This time, an electric current coursed through his body, slightly tensing his muscles. Suddenly, a surge of awareness swept through his mind, and his processing speed increased dramatically. It was as if his mind and body were synchronizing on an instinctive level. He could now calculate precisely how much force to exert and at what angle to shoot for the best archery shot. He felt that his perception and understanding of his surroundings had improved, allowing him to exploit all kinds of shooting angles. "Fortunately, I upgraded my mentality," he muttered, feeling a slight headache from the sheer amount of knowledge that had entered his head. It seemed simple, but it was packed with information. It was at that moment that everything around him went dark. In that darkness, there was an upright figure, looking at him seriously. It was an archer who looked like an elf, but had pale, almost grayish skin, silver-white hair, leather armor and plates with silver accents, and a gothic design that enhanced her beautiful figure. This figure did not look away from Aldril, which made him slightly uneasy. His presence was imposing, and something in his eyes seemed to pierce his soul. Just as he was about to ask who it was, the darkness receded, bringing him back to reality. Aldril blinked, puzzled. "What was that?" he muttered to himself, not waiting for an answer. "Is it going to be like Geralt again?" he thought, puzzled by what had just happened. He didn't know who the figure was. He'd only seen Lord of the Rings movies and played a game or two, but there was no one like that in any of them. "This system is a mystery," he muttered, shaking his head to clear his thoughts. He continued on his way to his room. The system was intriguing, but he knew he would get nowhere pondering why it was so. As he left the garden, he noticed a small plume of smoke rising from below. Raising an eyebrow, he watched carefully, only to discover dwarves laughing and talking around a campfire. Sensing Aldril's gaze, Keely looked up and shouted with a grin, "Come, Aldril. Join us." The others joined in Keely's shout. "Yes, Aldril, join us," added Beaufort. "Surely you are hungry after eating only plants," replied Gloin, clearly disdainful of the fruits and vegetables offered to him by the elves. An involuntary smile formed on Aldril's face. Gandalf once said that if you befriend dwarves, they will always include you in their plans and celebrations, and will be willing to die to save a friend. This is a good quality in dwarves, unlike men, who would betray you rather than die. Determined to join them, Aldril quietly descended and joined in the feast of the dwarves, who cheerfully offered him fruit wine. He could even see Bilbo clinging to Filly's shoulder. Given Bilbo's performance, it was predictable that he would gain the respect of the dwarves. This was confirmed by Filly's comment, "You were amazing in that fight, Bilbo. I thought you were a coward, but you were anything but. You showed a lot of spirit, despite not knowing how to use a weapon, yet you dared to fight." "Yes, Bilbo, it was a great surprise, but you showed the behavior of a true warrior," Balin added. This surprised Bilbo, for Balin used to call him Lord Baggins. The fact that Balin addressed him by name showed that he recognized Bilbo as one of his own. "A toast to Bilbo and our troll hunter," exclaimed Gloin, raising his flagon of wine. "Troll hunter? Did they really give me that nickname?" thought Aldril, with a wry smile. "A toast to our brave hobbit and our troll hunter," added Ori jovially. Watching as all the dwarves enjoyed themselves and raised their glasses, Aldril smiled. "Not a bad atmosphere. I will do my best to see that no one dies, as I can now consider them friends after all we have been through," he thought as he raised his glass and toasted with the others. While the group enjoyed their dinner, Aldril glimpsed Gandalf walking with his uncle Elrond and Thorin over a bridge, heading toward the waterfall. Seeing them, Aldril remembered that at this moment his uncle Elrond would help them reveal the secret message on the map. Turning away, Aldril could see Balin also looking in Gandalf's direction, his brow furrowed as he tapped his foot nervously. Seeing Balin's behavior, Aldril approached and asked, "What's wrong, Balin? Are you nervous about Thorin?" Surprised by Aldril's question, Balin looked at him for a few seconds before nodding. "I'm a bit nervous. What do you think they're talking about?" "You should know better than me what they were talking about, right?" Aldril replied with a slight smile. "If you're nervous about Thorin, why not join their conversation?" "Yeah, you're right. I'll go support Thorin," Balin said as he got up. "I'll come with you," Aldril said. He wanted to talk to his uncle Elrond for a bit, or at least have him tell him where the library was so he could learn more about the stone his great-grandmother gave him and what she mentioned about his name. What the hell did Telperion and Laurelin mean? And why did my great-grandmother mention that my mother named me Aldril in honor of these trees? Aldril thought as he followed the hurried Balin. General POV, as Aldril and Balin made their way toward Thorin and Gandalf, the latter two were having a heated conversation. "Show the map to Lord Elrond, Thorin," said Gandalf, giving a stern look to the stubborn dwarf who was reluctant to produce the map. This was the behavior Gandalf most detested in dwarves. They were extremely stubborn despite needing help to decipher the map. "I don't need to show anything to an elf. This map is the treasure of my people, and I won't show it to anyone," Thorin replied with a haughty look. When had a dwarf ever stooped to ask an elf for help? Deep down, he knew he truly needed the elf's knowledge, but something inside him said that asking an elf for help was dishonorable. For the love of the great Vala, stop being stubborn and show him. "You, more than anyone, know we need his help," Gandalf exclaimed in frustration. In all his long years, he was rarely pushed to his limits, but this stubborn dwarf took the prize, having greatly annoyed him 2 days in a row. Thorin shot him an annoyed look and said in a calm voice that conveyed his inner irritation, "This is the heritage of my people, and it is my responsibility to protect it." I won't let anyone decipher its secrets." Gandalf inhaled and exhaled to suppress his anger. You could even see his beard trembling slightly as he pressed his lips together tightly. "Your stubbornness will be the death of you sooner or later, Thorin Oakenshield. I will say this only once. Do you know that you are standing in front of one of the few people in Middle-earth who can understand how to decipher the map? Set aside your pride and show the map to Lord Elrond." As they approached, Balin and Aldril could hear more clearly the intense argument taking place between Gandalf and Thorin. Even the background laughter of the dwarves ceased. It seemed Gandalf's shouts had caught their attention. As they got closer, Aldril could see his uncle Elrond standing silently, watching Thorin with patience. But his patience was likely running thin, as even one of the kindest elves had his limits, and Thorin was pushing those limits. It was true that Elrond was intrigued by the map Gandalf mentioned and had agreed to help decipher its mysteries as a gesture of goodwill, but Thorin's stubbornness was vexing him. At that precise moment, when the atmosphere grew silent, Balin arrived and positioned himself beside Thorin, who wore a bitter expression. Gandalf's words had affected him, and with resignation, he pulled out the map. Seeing Thorin action, Balin immediately stepped forward and nervously said, "No, Thorin, don't show it." He knew there was no other way, but deep down, he also harbored an innate dislike for elves. This sentiment applied to all dwarves, hence their discourtesy and bad behavior toward elves. This feeling of dislike had intensified even more after the elves abandoned them and turned their backs on them following the dragon Smaug's attack. Placing his hand on Balin's shoulder, Aldril gave a nod, indicating for him not to be hasty. "Trust your king's decisions, Balin," were Aldril's words. Hearing this, Balin withdrew his hand and looked at Aldril, nodding. Aldril was right. He had to trust Thorin's decisions and set aside his dislike for the elves, as the mission to reclaim Erebor was more important than his simple distaste. Taking a step forward, Thorin handed the map to Elrond. Gandalf's words had poured cold water over his head. He decided to show the map because it was more important to uncover its hidden message and find the secret entrance to Erebor. "It is all for the good of my people," he told himself. With a smile, Elrond gracefully moved his hand and took the map Thorin showed him. Looking at the map, Elrond immediately recognized the location it depicted. "Erebor," he murmured, glancing at Thorin. "Do you want to discover what secrets this map holds?" he asked calmly. From the few clues, he deduced that these dwarves were going to reclaim Erebor. This unsettled him a bit. His nephew, whom he had just discovered was still alive, would go with these dwarves and probably face Smaug. This worried him slightly. Casting a glance at his nephew, who was beside Gandalf, Elrond could see determination in his eyes and the brooch his father once wore. Seeing the brooch, Elrond raised an eyebrow slightly, intrigued. He would ask later where he got it. Thorin's voice drew his attention away from his nephew. "I need to discover the message hidden in the map," Thorin said calmly. "You still understand the dwarven language, right?" Gandalf asked politely. Elrond slowly opened the map and walked slowly toward the moonlight. "Sir Thithil," he murmured as he inspected the map delicately, as if it were an invaluable piece he didn't want to damage. "Moon runes?" "Of course," said Gandalf with a smile. He had overlooked this way of keeping secrets. He turned his gaze to Thorin. "It's easy to forget them." Ignoring Gandalf's conversation, Elrond focused on the map and spoke while still inspecting it. In this case, the moon runes can only be read under the moonlight in the same phase and season in which they were written. Turning around, Elrond looked at them. "Can you read them?" Thorin asked, his heart filled with excitement. Despite his hatred for elves, he had to admit this elf impressed him with his knowledge. "Of course, follow me," said Elrond, turning and walking toward an outdoor observation platform atop a mountain. Seeing Elrond move, everyone else immediately followed him. Aldril didn't want to miss this plot moment and wanted to increase his level of exploration a bit. Maybe reaching 0.5% would give him something? Besides, he would take the opportunity to ask his uncle about the elf stone his great-grandmother gave him. In the distance, Bilbo, seeing Aldril and company following Elrond, quickly stood up, wanting to follow them. Gloin beside him watched as Bilbo ran off to catch up with the others. "Bilbo, aren't you going to eat your cooked sausage?" he shouted to get Bilbo's attention. "You can have it for me," Bilbo replied as he hurried to catch up with the others. "Hee all right, Bilbo," said Gloin with a silly smile, then frowned in annoyance as the cooked sausage was snatched by Bumber. "Hey, you bastard, that's mine." Aldril and the others followed Elrond to the top of the observation platform. It had a beautiful view of all Rivendell, with waterfalls cascading down the sides, where the moonlight cast its soft glow over the platform. There, only a transparent crystal base stood out at the tip of the platform. Elrond calmly walked to the crystal base and, while delicately placing the map on it, spoke. "It seems you were destined to come to Rivendell. Fortune smiles upon you, Thorin Oakenshield. The same lunar phase with which the map was written shines tonight." Not long after Elrond finished speaking, a dark cloud floated on the horizon and was carried away by the wind, allowing the magnificence of the moon to be revealed, bringing a soft glow that reflected on the crystal base, illuminating it and revealing the hidden message on the map. Seeing the hidden message, Elrond spoke aloud. "Stand by the grey stone when the thrush knocks, and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's Day will shine upon the keyhole." "What is Durin Day?" Bilbo asked Balin in a low voice. Glancing sideways at him, Gandalf explained. "The first day of the dwarves' new year, when the last moon of autumn and the first sun of winter appear in the sky together." "These are bad news," said Thorin with one arm crossed and the other holding his chin, giving the appearance of being nervous. "Summer is passing. Durin's Day will come soon." Seeing his king starting to get nervous, Balin approached. "We still have time. We must be in exactly the right place at the right time. Then and only then will the door open." "Then do you plan to enter, and then what? Face and kill Smaug?" Elrond asked, looking at Thorin seriously. At Elrond's question, Thorin remained silent and glanced sideways at Aldril, who was calmly looking at the horizon, seemingly oblivious to the conversation they were having. Elrond clearly noticed Thorin's gaze. Seeing that it was directed at his nephew, Elrond frowned. "Are you thinking of having him face the dragon?" he asked in a more serious tone than usual. Thorin's response didn't come because Aldril spoke, drawing the attention of the others. "It's what I've decided, uncle. That's why I'm traveling with Thorin's group." With a determined look, Aldril turned and met Elrond's eyes. Remembering seeing that same look once, Elrond's fears took a step back. Seeing how Tindamil's silhouette overlapped with Aldril's, Elrond stopped frowning and with a nostalgic smile said, "That determined look and confident stance, you are undoubtedly just like your mother," he murmured. "In that case, I wish you the best on your next journey. Now you should rest. We will talk tomorrow." With calm steps, Elrond stood next to Aldril as he placed one of his hands on his shoulder. With a nod, Aldril followed the others who were beginning to leave. Walking beside Gandalf, the wizard looked at him and with a smile said, "Uncle? I imagined your origins were not common, but it's a surprise that you are related to Lord Elrond. I hope you tell me the details later." "Yes, Aldril, I didn't understand why you call that elf uncle," said Bilbo, curious. Besides Gandalf, Aldril was the one he got along with best, so Bilbo felt curious about what Aldril had said. "I'll tell you everything tomorrow," Aldril replied with a calm smile. It seemed that only Gandalf and Bilbo had heard his conversation with Elrond, as Balin and Thorin were absorbed in what they had discovered and hadn't paid attention. As Elrond gazed out over the horizon, a soft and delicate but very familiar voice sounded behind him, causing him to turn quickly with a startled face. "It has been a long time, my child," said Elwing, her eyes full of affection and fondness. With quick steps, Elrond approached Elwing, took her hands gently in his, and with a soulful smile said, "Yes, it has been a long time, mother." General POV. After leaving the observation platform, Aldril chatted a bit with Bilbo and Gandalf, specifically about what they had been doing in Rivendell. When they arrived at the garden, they found the dwarves still dining. "It seems the dwarves have been drinking a lot," Aldril said, noticing the number of fruit wine bottles scattered around. He wouldn't lie, the elves' wine was extremely delicious. How do they make it? He wondered. He added a future goal to his list, to try all the different beverages Middle-earth had to offer and learn how they were made. "I've had enough of these dwarves for today. I'll go rest." "Have a good night," Gandalf said, exasperated by the dwarves' behavior. He bid farewell to Aldril and Bilbo. As Gandalf departed, Aldril turned to Bilbo and asked, "And you, Bilbo, are you going to rest too?" "Yes, entering Rivendell made the physical fatigue disappear, but the mental exhaustion is still there. I'll go to sleep." "Remember, you need to tell me why the elf says he's your uncle," Bilbo said with a yawn. The orc chase had mentally exhausted him. Upon arriving in Rivendell, he thought about sleeping, but his adventurous spirit prevented it. So, after eating, he decided to explore Rivendell, marveling at the architecture and especially the elves' cutlery. And you, Aldril, are you going to sleep too? Bilbo asked. I'll stay and dine with the dwarves. I slept a lot earlier, Aldril replied, stretching and cracking his back. The growl of his stomach indicated that he was hungry, having only had breakfast. In that case, good night, Bilbo said, quickly walking out of the garden, only to stop and return quickly. I remembered I haven't been given a room to sleep in, he added with an embarrassed look. I guess I'll stay with the dwarves. Haha, you can rest in the room they gave me. Come, I'll guide you. With a friendly smile, Aldril guided the little hobbit through the beautiful halls of Rivendell. After walking for a few minutes, they arrived at an extremely beautiful white door. Upon entering, the first thing that captured the eye was the large arched window that occupied an entire wall, offering an impressive view of the valleys and waterfalls surrounding Rivendell. Moonlight filtered through thin gauze curtains, bathing the room in a soft glow. Well, here we are. Rest well, Bilbo. If you need anything, you know where I'll be, Aldril said with a slight laugh. Bilbo smiled gratefully and nodded, feeling a great relief at the sight of a soft, fluffy bed waiting for him. Aldril closed the door and headed back to the garden, where the dwarves were still laughing and eating merrily. Where's Bilbo? Asked Dwalin, raising an eyebrow as he took a bite of a lamb leg. Yes, where is he? Added Fili, raising a mug of wine to his mouth. Shaking his head, Aldril found the situation amusing. Initially, they had despised Bilbo, but after showing his courage in the fight with the orcs, he earned the respect of all the dwarves. Our dear hobbit was tired and decided to go to sleep, Aldril replied as he sat next to Kili. Now, Bomber, pass me a leg of lamb. Catch, Bomber said, tossing one of the many lamb legs he had on his plate. This simple gesture showed that he already considered Aldril a friend, as he was usually very protective of his food. Looking around the group, Aldril didn't see Balin and Thorin. Curious about their absence, he turned to Kili. Hey, where are Balin and Thorin? He asked, casually biting into the lamb leg. Hearing Aldril speak, Kili looked at him and shrugged. No idea. I imagine Thorin is taking a walk. As for Balin, he was with us a moment ago. Maybe he went to find Thorin. Is that so? Aldril murmured, remembering the plot of the movie. Originally, Thorin and Bilbo overheard Gandalf and his uncle Elrond talking about the expedition being a risk and that his uncle Elrond did not support Gandalf's decision to help the dwarves. This led to Thorin escaping Rivendell, fearing they would be detained by the elves. But now, unlike the movie, his uncle agreed with Gandalf helping the dwarves on their journey and even aided them with provisions. And instead of Bilbo, it was Balin who accompanied Thorin at this time. Shaking his head slightly, Aldril wasn't worried about that for now. Aldril POV, after finishing dinner, I stayed chatting with the dwarves. They mostly told stories about their people and occasionally talked about some dwarf women. Even a drunk Fili said he would introduce me to a beautiful dwarf woman. A few hours later, everyone started falling asleep in the garden. I shook my head at their carefree behavior. Settling down to rest, I took one last look at the beautiful night. The starry sky looked even brighter. Slowly closing my eyes, I let Morpheus' arms embrace me and take me to the world of dreams. In Aldril Dream I found myself in a strange place. It was a forest again, but unlike the previous time, this forest was extremely beautiful. Huge trees stood proudly, many flowers adorned the surroundings, creating a calming atmosphere. I began to walk through the forest, admiring its beauty. At that moment, I glimpsed a slender figure with a powerful presence, long silver hair hidden by a hood, and bright red eyes. Despite their color, they conveyed a sense of tranquility, as if a great burden had been lifted from them. She wore armor, the material of which I couldn't describe, but its colors were very dark, contrasting with her gray skin. She carried a bow on her back. Oh friend, I know where this is going, I thought. I didn't recognize the woman, so I calmly approached and spoke. Excuse me, can you tell me who you are? I went straight to the point, tired of all the intrigue surrounding me. The woman looked at me intently and lowered her hood, revealing pointed ears. This surprised me a bit, as she wasn't just any woman, she was an elf. With a melodious voice, the elf spoke slowly. Your mental space is extremely calming, besides keeping me at peace. As for my name, I am Sylvanas Windrunner. I was once a ranger general, but that doesn't matter. I've been brought to this place to guide you in archery, boy. Damn, I knew it. Will it be like this every time I level up a skill? I thought to myself. Besides, I was intrigued. I didn't know who this elf was. Was she the one who appeared when I leveled up my archery? I didn't know, but if she would help me improve with the bow, she was welcome. "Follow me," she said with an elegant gesture, turning and beginning to walk. Following her, I arrived at a clearing with several wooden targets scattered around. Throwing me a bow that I didn't know where it appeared from, Sylvanas stood beside me. "First, feel the bow," she said. "Let it be an extension of yourself. Your breathing, your movements, everything must be in harmony." Following her instructions, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, starting to feel in sync with the bow. Previously, I wasn't able to feel in sync with the bow, yet I was very lethal. Now that I began to feel in sync, how dangerous would I become? "Now shoot," she said softly, interrupting my thoughts. Relaxing, I tensed the bow and shot at a random spot where I felt a target would be. Shishplak. Opening my eyes, I was dumbfounded. The arrow had pierced the target completely, creating a hole in its center. "Not bad," Sylvanas said. "But this is just the beginning. You must learn to shoot under any condition, in any circumstance. Even if death's claws are on your neck, you must remain calm." With that, she began teaching me many concepts I didn't know, as well as different techniques. Finally, after a few hours, Sylvanas took me to a cliff where the sun began to rise over the horizon. "Remember, boy," Sylvanas said as her body began to fade. "The true mastery of the bow is not only in the technique, but in the connection with the world around you. Be one with your environment, and you will be unbeatable." Turning to see the horizon, she murmured something quietly that I couldn't hear. Who would have thought I'd be teaching a human archery? If they find out, I'd be the laughingstock. Standing next to her to admire the horizon, I bowed and thanked her. "I appreciate your guidance." "I won't disappoint you," I said, only to hear a bit of mockery in her usually cold voice. "You'd better not die, boy. Otherwise, I'll revive you and kill you myself." With that last comment, I saw a smile on her face before she disappeared. Releasing a breath I didn't know I was holding, I relaxed. This elf had a strong presence, almost like that of a king, but she said something that caught my attention. "This is my mental space," I murmured. "I guess feeling connected to the forest is due to my elf blood." With that said, my entire surroundings began to disappear. Well, it's time to wake up. Opening my eyes, I found the face of an elf with golden blonde hair, smiling at me. The morning light made his hair seem to shine. "Such a carefree attitude, like your mother and great-grandfather, young Aldril," the elf said, laughing softly. His voice had a warm and friendly tone, as if he was reminiscing about old times. Blinking, confused, I stood up and looked at him. "Do I know you?" I asked, trying to organize my thoughts after the vivid dream. "Oh, where are my manners?" "I am Glorfindel," he said. "Aldril POV Glorfindel." I repeated slowly, trying to recall if I had heard that name before. After a few seconds, I gave up, realizing I had never heard it before. "It's a pleasure, and it seems you already know my name and met my mother," I said as I slowly stood up. I had a slight ache in my body from the uncomfortable position I had slept in, so I started stretching to loosen my tense muscles. "That's right, I knew your mother, a splendid warrior, I must say," the elf replied warmly, mentioning my mother. "I've come to talk with you. Why don't we chat as we head to the dining hall for breakfast?" His friendly attitude was contagious, and he exuded a calm and peaceful presence. However, I could sense that beneath this tranquil demeanor lay an experienced warrior. "Sure, lead the way," I said, curious about what the elf wanted to discuss with me. Could it be something related to my mother? I thought while following Glorfindel, ignoring his rude behavior of inviting only me to breakfast and not the still sleeping dwarves. Our conversation started quickly, as Glorfindel got straight to the point after we left the garden, which I appreciated since deciphering what people wanted to say, especially Gandalf with his occasional mysterious and vague answers, was tedious. Soon Glorfindel opened the conversation. "I've heard from Lord Elrond that you plan to face Smaug," he said with a calm expression. This surprised me a bit. Could he be here on behalf of my uncle to give me advice? I thought as I adopted a serious demeanor. Something told me I should listen to everything the elf said, and I was right, as what he said next surprised me. Dragons are not common enemies. They are dangerous and very lethal. However, they have weaknesses, Glorfindel continued. Weaknesses. I asked, curious to know more as I moved to walk beside him, initially trailing behind him. Nodding, Glorfindel continued, "Firstly, dragons have a tough armor of scales that protects them from almost any weapon," he explained, as if giving a lesson, which wasn't far from the truth. However, there is a spot on their belly where the scales are less dense. A strong blow can wound them. Secondly, they tend to be arrogant and boastful of their power in combat. Use this to your advantage. Provoking them will make them angry. An angry dragon is less careful and more prone to making mistakes. But be very careful. In your current state, it will be difficult to face the dragon alone. I recommend having someone else assist you. Don't let your arrogance cloud your judgment. I understand, I said, nodding slowly. My arrogance had plummeted after nearly dying to a warg, and Glorfindel was right. I would need help. Would Bard and his black arrow be enough? I didn't know. Perhaps the help of Legolas and Toriel would also be necessary. Thank you, Glorfindel. I'll make sure to remember your words. His advice was very helpful, as I still had the idea of facing Smaug alone. Probably a remnant of my arrogance was still alive, but Glorfindel had come to kill that remnant. Don't thank me. I have faced many dragons in the past, and I must say that I was always accompanied by my comrades. Otherwise, I wouldn't know if I'd still be alive, he replied with a kind smile. But I was sure that even without help, he could kill the dragons. I thought our conversation was over as we reached the elegant dining hall, and Glorfindel didn't speak further. Just as we were about to enter, Glorfindel stopped and his expression changed as if he had remembered something he had forgotten. Oh, I forgot, there's a third thing. The swords you carry can pierce the dragon's tough skin. One of them even killed the first dragon ever created. Distract the dragon with the help of the others and strike by surprise at its head, just behind the middle horn. It will be a lethal blow. With that said, Glorfindel entered the dining hall without waiting for my response. The natural way Glorfindel spoke about facing dragons left me speechless. Shaking my head, I entered the dining hall, ready for a good breakfast while grateful for my clear mindset. If I were the me from the previous night, I would have a headache from everything happening so quickly. As I entered the dining hall, I greeted my uncle with a cheerful smile. He was sitting at the high table, gesturing for me to join him. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, bathing the room in a warm morning glow. The aromas of freshly baked bread, fresh fruits, and honey filled the air, making my stomach growl in anticipation. To his left was Glorfindel, still smiling. "Good morning, uncle," I exclaimed as I approached the table. "Good morning, Aldril," my uncle responded, his voice cheerful and welcoming. A few minutes later, Gandalf and Bilbo joined us, both looking well-rested with cheerful smiles. "Good morning, you two. How did you sleep?" I asked, smiling. Bilbo's cheerful response came quickly. "I slept wonderfully. The elf's bed is very soft. Last night was the best sleep I've had since I left Hobbiton. Thank you for lending me your room, Aldril." His enthusiasm and the sparkle in his eyes made me laugh a little. He seemed like a small child who had just received their favorite toy. "I slept well," added Gandalf, with his usual calm smile. "Even a wizard like me needs rest, and being away from the stubborn dwarves is a blessing. It's a pity we still have a long journey with them." Mentioning the dwarves, his brow furrowed slightly, showing a hint of exasperation. "Speaking of the dwarves, where's Thorin?" I thought, a bit puzzled not to see him here. It would be natural for Elrond to invite him to breakfast despite their differences. Those were my thoughts until Thorin entered the hall with Balin. Both seemed to have not slept well last night. With a nod, they greeted us and proceeded to sit next to Gandalf. Balin, on the other hand, smiled cheerfully at us as he sat at the lower table, looking around as if wondering where the others were. Frowning, Thorin looked at us and asked, "Where are the others?" "Oh right, I forgot to wake them," I thought, smiling wryly at my oversight. "They're probably still resting," I said, trying to maintain a serene expression. "I tried to wake them this morning, but it was impossible because they drank a lot of wine last night." A little lie wouldn't hurt anyone, right? Meanwhile, with the dwarf snoring was the only melody heard in the beautiful garden, marred by the dwarves and the large wine bottles scattered around. The gentle sound of the fountain was overshadowed by occasional farts. One of these was so stinky that the faces of the others wrinkled, and the aroma was so strong that they began to wake up. Bofur was the first to open his eyes. He sat up slowly, one hand on his head and the other on the ground. "Where are we?" he muttered, blinking against the sunlight. Keely, who was lying next to him, stretched and yawned. "I think we're still in Rivendell. At least, I hope so." Philly, who had used his cloak as a pillow, sat up and scratched his beard. "Does anyone else feel like a troll ran over them?" he asked, massaging his temples. Meanwhile, Bomber, who had slept soundly in the middle of the group, continued to snore loudly. And he farted at intervals. "Damn it, this stinky smell woke me up." "Bomber, wake up. If you keep this up, you'll kill us with poison," exclaimed Dory, giving him a gentle nudge with his foot. Bomber opened one eye, then the other, and got up with difficulty, rubbing his stomach. "What time is it?" he asked, yawning. "Damn, it stinks," he exclaimed, covering his nose. This provoked silence from everyone else, only to be broken by Philly's laughter, who clutched his stomach from the laughing fit, joined by the rest of the group. Returning with Aldril, breakfast had begun, and Thorin, upon hearing what had been said, asked no further questions. He knew his team members well and recalled seeing them drink the previous night. Without further comment, he began to eat in silence. The gentle melody played by the elves filled the room with tranquility, easing the usual bustle of the dwarves. Breakfast proceeded normally, a rare moment of peace in their tumultuous journey. After finishing my breakfast, I noticed Gandalf had also finished. Seizing the opportunity, I leaned towards him and whispered, "Hey Gandalf, how long will we be here?" I wanted to know if I would have time to read or ask about some things my great-grandmother mentioned, and to learn more about my mother. Gandalf, with his usual sharpness, quickly understood my reasons. With a smile, he whispered back, "We'll be here for a while, so don't worry. You'll have plenty of time to speak with Lord Elrond." I nodded gratefully. After breakfast, I should go train with the bow and then visit the library or talk to Uncle Elrond if he's not busy, I thought. My mind was already planning the day, eager to make the most of our time in Rivendell. Seeing my joy, Gandalf smiled. Yesterday, after Lord Elrond returned from his discussion with me, he mentioned to Gandalf that the council would be here due to the increasing orc attacks, so Elrond told Gandalf to wait a few days. General POV. The melody played by the elves made the atmosphere in the dining room harmonious. The soft sunlight filtering in highlighted the beginning of a beautiful morning. Without the noisy dwarves, everyone was able to enjoy a pleasant breakfast. It was a time when the peace and beauty of Tolkien's world was manifest. After a few minutes of silence, most of those present finished their breakfast, which allowed conversations to arise among them. Prominent among these conversations was that of Aldril and Bilbo, who looked at Aldril with a surprised expression. "Are you telling me that Tindamil, the dragon-slaying adventurer mentioned by Balin, is your mother?" whispered Bilbo, his eyes wide with surprise. "But Balin mentioned that she was the daughter of the first king of Numenor, so she was not an elf. How could she have lived so long? Could he be lying?" Bilbo's thoughtful face let Aldril guess what he was thinking, so he only gave a forceful answer for the moment. "My mother is half-elf. They're called Paradhill," Aldril whispered back, then paused and shook his head. "You know what? I'm going to go practice archery. Come along, I can teach you some sword moves and explain why my mother lived so long." He hesitated for a moment, tempted to explore Rivendell further, but Bilbo dismissed that idea when he heard about sword practice. In the battle against the orcs, he felt something flow through his body, allowing him to forget his cowardice. This excited him, but now, in a more relaxed and safe environment, he realized that he wielded the sword only by instinct and needed someone to teach him how to fight properly. And who better than his troll-slaying friend? Yes, Bilbo considered Aldril a friend, for he was the only one who spoke up and watched over his safety, apart from Gandalf. Looking cheerful, Bilbo nodded enthusiastically, like a little boy being told he was going to an amusement park. Laughing lightly, Aldril rose slowly and spoke in a low voice. "Excuse me, I'll go practice with the bow," he said with a polite bow, and then left the dining room, but not before glancing at the elf maidens who had brought them breakfast. "Thank you for the breakfast. It was delicious," he added, causing the elves to nod with charming smiles. On the first day alone, that man had proven that he was unlike any they had ever seen in their lives. Moreover, his presence gave off a serene and commanding aura that would undoubtedly allow him to woo them if he so desired. Watching Aldril depart, Bilbo rose quickly and mimicked Aldril's bow. "Thank you for such a wonderful breakfast. If you will allow me, I will join Aldril in his practice," he said hurriedly, running to catch up with Aldril. As Aldril and Bilbo left, Balin looked at Thorin, who returned his gaze with mutual understanding. They both rose from the table without thanks, stating that they had business to attend to with the other dwarves. Thorin's discourteous behavior caused Gandalf to frown, and with a sigh, he turned to Elrond. "I apologize for Thorin's discourteous behavior," he said, but Elrond only smiled, maintaining his serene demeanor as if the dwarf's behavior did not bother him. "Do not apologize for them, Gandalf. The dislike between our races is rooted deep in our souls, so such behavior is understandable," he said calmly. Gandalf sighed and shook his head slightly. Why did the great Vala all give them such a discourteous personality? Gandalf's thoughts were interrupted by Elrond, who stood up after receiving a message from one of the elves. "Follow me, Gandalf. One of our guests has arrived." "In that case, I will go with young Aldril," Glorfindel said as he rose from the table. Elrond nodded in reply, and with a polite bow, Glorfindel left the dining hall in search of Aldril. "Hey Bilbo, I think we're lost. I don't know where we'll find a place to practice," Aldril said, cringing in embarrassment. He had been confident on his way out, but now he didn't know where he was going. Also hiding his embarrassment because he didn't know where they were either, Bilbo began to look around. They were in a garden at the moment and could not ask for directions, as there were no elves around. "We should go back and ask," he said, turning away. Resigned, Aldril shook his head. As they turned around, they heard the cheerful voice of a child. "Garrick Inogrim Arwen, Gluhaina Thost. I saw some dwarves, Arwen, they look very ugly and stink," the boy said. Bilbo looked confused, for he did not understand the language, but Aldril's eyes widened slightly at the sound of Arwen's name. "Garrick Hain Ain Aragorn, Adar Pentuovathar Na Hain. I saw them too, Aragorn. Father said we should not go near," a melodic voice answered the boy. They had both stepped out of a hallway into the garden where Bilbo and Aldril were standing. The beautiful elf looked with surprise at the two people in the garden. One appeared to be a dwarf, but this person was clean-cut and lacked the long ugly beard commonly worn by dwarves. As he noticed the other person, he gasped. He was an extraordinarily attractive human. Her heart pounded and a sense of familiarity surged within her as if she were reunited with a lost relative. Involuntarily, she looked affectionately at the man, who returned her gaze with a smile, causing the beautiful elf to smile back, further enhancing her already beautiful features. Seeing this, the boy holding the beautiful elf frowned angrily and tried to sound as masculine as possible. "Who are you?" he asked. Noticing that Aldril was still staring at the elf, Bilbo quickly adjusted his clothes and with a smile introduced them. "I am Bilbo Baggins, and this is my friend Aldril. We are both guests of Lord Elrond. We got lost while looking for a place to practice with our swords." Bilbo's introduction made Aldril and the beautiful elf stop looking at each other, both slightly flushed with embarrassment. The elf looked up at the smiling Bilbo. "Pleased to meet you. I am Arwen, daughter of Elrond of Rivendell, and this is Aragorn. If you like, I can guide you," she said politely. "I would appreciate it," Aldril said, making Arwen smile even wider. "In that case, follow me." As they followed Arwen, Aragorn threw annoyed glances at Aldril from time to time, who only returned them with a smile, as if mocking him, further provoking Aragorn's anger. He looked at Arwen and spoke in Elvish, thinking that those who followed him would not understand. "Manan Turnler Hain, Arwen? You Edel Gwaith, you Orthag, I Cheltha Gway. Why did you look at him so long, Arwen? He is an ugly man, you should not look at him. He will infect you with his ugliness." A frown appeared on the elf's handsome face, and in her melodious voice, she gently scolded the 10-year-old boy. "Avu Belagal Aragorn, Amdar Adar Neen Hain, Bo I getteth there, don't be rude Aragorn. They are my father's guests, we must be polite." Slightly rebuked by his platonic love, Aragorn turned his head away, hiding his annoyance. "Said O hen, Ubani Athathon I Melmelenig, calm down, child, I will not steal your sweetheart," Aldril said in Elvish. Hearing Aldril speak in Elvish, Aragorn and Arwen stopped abruptly, surprise evident on Arwen's face as she turned to look at him. "You speak Elvish," she said, ignoring Aldril's jest. "Yes, after all, my mother is half-elven," Aldril replied, hiding the fact that he spoke all languages due to his system. "My father mentioned last night that my cousin Tindamil's son had arrived in Rivendell. Is that you?" Recovering from the surprise, Arwen asked, genuinely curious and somewhat expectantly. As a child, her father would tell her stories of her cousin's exciting adventures, which thrilled her greatly, even made her wish to be an adventurer like her. And now, before her stood possibly her cousin's son, who would have more stories about his mother, wouldn't he? "That's right, Tindamil is my mother," Aldril replied with a cheerful smile and love in his voice at the mention of his mother's name. Then that makes us family, Arwen said cheerfully, flashing a smile so charming that even Bilbo was mesmerized by such beauty. Her moment was interrupted by a melodious but slightly masculine voice. "Oh, I see you two have already met." Glorfindel appeared behind Aldril and Bilbo in a moment. Lord Glorfindel/Master Glorfindel Arwen and Aragorn said in unison, the latter bowing slightly, demonstrating his apprentice attitude. With a nod, Glorfindel looked at Bilbo and Aldril. "I thought I would find you at the training ground," he spoke with his usual serene attitude, though there was a hint of mockery in his voice, already imagining that these two got lost along the way. "Yes, well, we got lost," Bilbo said while lowering his head in shame. Aldril, on the contrary, gave a wry smile while scratching his shoulder and turning his head to hide his embarrassment. "Yes, we got lost along the way." The attitude of both of them provoked a slight melodious laugh from Arwen. Meanwhile, with Gandalf, "What?" I exclaimed in surprise. "Aldril is Tindamil's son? That explains why his hair shines like stars. He inherited his mother's blessing. Now I understand why something told me to take him along with the expedition," Gandalf murmured. After breakfast, Lord Elrond was informed that one of the people he was waiting for had arrived. As he followed him, Elrond told the origin of Aldril, causing Gandalf a great surprise. "That's right, he is the son of the formidable warrior Tindamil," replied Elrond, as they reached a high platform, which had a beautiful view of the valley territory. On the horizon were only green trees, being illuminated by the soft sunlight. Admiring the view was an old man in white robes, who upon sensing the two people turned around. "It is good to see you again, Saruman." General POV. In a dense open field, illuminated by the morning sun, 5 people were gathered. 3 of them were preparing to practice, while the other 2 watched. These people were Aldril, Glorfindel, Bilbo, Aragorn, and Arwen. After a brief conversation, Glorfindel guided them to an area where they could train. Arwen, curious to learn more about Aldril, followed them to Aragorn's displeasure. He was reluctant because he felt jealous of the attention Arwen was giving to dear Aldril. However, with an idea in his head, he grabbed a wooden sword and walked towards Aldril and Bilbo. Seizing the moment to show off, he stood in front of Aldril and said, "I challenge you. I want to put into practice what I've learned." With a raised eyebrow, Aldril smiled and shook his head, amused by Aragorn's action. It was very transparent why he did that. He was clearly jealous. Apparently, he hadn't heard when Aldril mentioned that he and Arwen were family. Arwen was beautiful, he wouldn't deny that. He would fall in love with her if they weren't family. Unlike the Japanese, Aldril had a strong distaste for people who committed incest, and even if a relationship between them somehow developed, his uncle Elrond would not approve of them being together. Additionally, his own blood indirectly told him that committing such an act was a blasphemy. Clearly, in Middle-earth, incest has had a tragic ending. This can be demonstrated in the story of Turin Turambar, where his sister Erwin was bewitched by the first dragon Glorung. The spell caused her to lose her memory and be found naked in a forest by Turin. Turin had been informed that his sister was dead, so when he found her, he didn't believe it was her. Years later, they fell in love, and Erwin became pregnant. After Turin killed the dragon, its blood splashed on him, rendering him unconscious. Erwin, in her desperation, went looking for him, finding the half-dead dragon and Turin unconscious. The dragon, in a final act of malice, revealed that Turin was her brother. This devastated her, and believing her brother was dead, she threw herself off a cliff, committing suicide along with her child. With an idea in mind, Aldril said, "There is a better person than me." He turned to Bilbo. "Here, my dear hobbit, is a better opponent for you." His comment made everyone look at Bilbo, who had a surprised look on his face as he pointed at himself. "Me? But I don't know how to use a sword," he said, distressed by the suggestion. Aragorn pointed his wooden sword at Aldril. "I don't want to fight a dwarf, I want to fight you." His comment was met with a huff from Bilbo. "Dwarf? Hey kid, for your information, I'm a hobbit. Don't compare me to those dirty and rude dwarves." Aldril let out a soft laugh and placed a hand on Bilbo's shoulder. "Don't worry, Bilbo. This will be fun. Just follow my instructions. Plus, it will help me find your strengths, and you'll learn much faster by practicing with someone." "But Aldril," he said, only to be interrupted by Glorfindel. "I think it's a good idea. Aragorn has just begun his training, so it will help us find his weaknesses and strengths." With a hand on his chin, Bilbo thought for a few seconds before nodding, though he didn't seem very convinced. Taking off his sword, he handed it to Aldril to put away. Aragorn, a bit annoyed that his master revealed he hadn't been training for long, took his combat stance. Glorfindel maintained his characteristic serene attitude, while Arwen suppressed a smile, eager to see how the scene would unfold. After all, Aragorn was 10 years old and the same size as Bilbo. "All right, little Aragorn, don't be too hard on Bilbo. It's his first day," said Aldril, taking a position next to Glorfindel. The latter nodded and said, "First, let's see what you've got. Bilbo, just defend and try to learn the moves Aragorn makes." Aragorn reluctantly advanced and launched an attack towards Bilbo. The hobbit clumsily raised his wooden sword, blocking the blow with difficulty. Aldril and Glorfindel exchanged approving glances. "Good, Bilbo. Now try to return the strike," suggested Aldril. With more confidence, Bilbo attempted an attack, which Aragorn easily dodged. However, the young Dunedain flashed a smug smile at the hobbit. Frowning at Aragorn's arrogant smile, Bilbo recalled the moves he made when he fought the orcs. With a step forward, he swung his wooden sword. Seeing the movement, Aragorn confidently held his sword with one hand, sure he would block Bilbo's attack. However, he was taken by surprise as it was just a feint, and Bilbo immediately spun, causing the sword to strike Aragorn's side. "Good move, Bilbo. Aragorn, stop being arrogant. Remember, you've also only been training for a short time." "Don't be overconfident," said Glorfindel, a bit impressed by the hobbit's surprise attack, which reminded him of a certain elf from Gondolin. With a smile, Aldril made a comment that piqued Glorfindel's interest. "Not long ago, we fought a group of orcs. At first, Bilbo was very cowardly, but after we picked up some elven swords, his attitude changed, and as if by magic, he learned some moves." "Curious," murmured Glorfindel, clearly having a vague idea why the hobbit learned some moves. The practice fight between Bilbo and Aragorn lasted a few more minutes. There were no further surprises, but the fight allowed Aldril to discover Bilbo's strengths and weaknesses. Bilbo was clearly very good with footwork, however, his significant flaw was his strength. Bilbo could become an assassin, and if we consider that he would later obtain the One Ring, which made him invisible, he could become the deadliest assassin in Middle-earth. But this does not align with Bilbo's kind nature. At most, he would only fight as a last resort. After the fight, Aragorn was a bit upset because he didn't get to show off as he wanted. Seeing Aragorn's bad mood, Arwen approached and with a soft smile, wiped his sweat with her handkerchief. "Don't be in a bad mood, Aragorn. It was just a practice fight," she said. Her melodious voice lifted the spirits of the young Dunedain. Meanwhile, Bilbo excitedly ran to Aldril. "Did you see that? I'm not bad with the sword, right?" Laughing lightly at Bilbo's joy, Aldril patted him on the shoulder. "That's right, Bilbo. Now that I know your strength, I'll show you some moves that would fit well in your repertoire." As Aldril said this, Glorfindel approached them. "It seems Mr. Baggins isn't as bad as he says." "Thank you for your words," Bilbo said, scratching the back of his neck, embarrassed by the praise. "By the way, could you both show me the swords you found?" Glorfindel asked with his serene smile. He was curious and wanted to confirm his suspicions. "Of course, here. Can you tell me if it has a name?" Bilbo, now in high spirits, happily took his sword and handed it to Glorfindel. Taking the dagger, which was a sword to Bilbo, with great care, Glorfindel unsheathed it and with a surprised look said, "Sting." Hearing its name, the sword glowed softly in a blue tone, which surprised Bilbo, who never imagined that his sword would shine like Aldril's. "This is a dagger from Gondolin, crafted by one of my friends." With a nostalgic smile, he returned the dagger to Bilbo. "It will glow when orcs are near. Take good care of it, Bilbo." Bilbo hesitantly took the dagger, now knowing its name, which showed that Balin was wrong. It seemed his sword was also named in battle. Turning his attention to Aldril, the latter shrugged and pulled out his two swords. Looking at them for a second, Aldril thought of a problem. "My wolf school style doesn't adapt to dual wielding. What should I do? Ask Uncle Elrond for help?" he wondered. Unaware of Aldril's thoughts, Glorfindel widened his eyes. For the first time, his calm expression was broken. "These swords were supposed to be separated," he exclaimed, making both Arwen and Aragorn look over. "Anguirel and Anglical, both forged from a fallen meteorite," Glorfindel said as he approached Aldril. "May I?" "Of course." Aldril handed the swords to Glorfindel, who was surprised to feel both swords fervently rejecting him. He quickly returned them to Aldril. These swords will reject anyone but you. Moreover, Anguirel was used by your mother. We thought it was lost, but it seems it found its way back. Recollecting himself, he looked at the other sword. Anglical, on the other hand, was believed lost centuries ago. You carry with you the most powerful swords in Middle-earth. A bit surprised, Aldril realized that this elf was no ordinary one, so he asked, "How do you know?" As far as he knew, Glorfindel was never mentioned in the movies, and he felt curious about this elf. "Oh, it's natural that I know. After all, I was in most of the wars, even before Elrond was born. I even protected your great-grandfather Erendil when he was just a child," he said with a nonchalant attitude. This made everyone look at him in surprise, even Arwen, who always thought he was just one of her father's subordinates. "By your faces, I can imagine you want to know more," he said with a smile. He rarely spoke about his past. Seeing everyone nodding like children waiting for a bedtime story, he continued, "All right, but this isn't the place for a long talk. Let's go somewhere more comfortable, and there I'll tell you how I faced a Balrog." With that said, he turned around, followed by everyone. Among them, Aldril was lost in his thoughts. Did he say a Balrog? Damn, who is this elf? "With Gandalf, Saruman, it's been a while," Gandalf said cheerfully, with a jovial tone, as if he had reunited with an old friend. However, Saruman maintained a stoic face and with a deep and severe voice, reprimanded Gandalf without even greeting him. "This time you've gone too far, Gandalf. If it weren't for the message I received from Elrond a month ago, I would never have imagined you would support Thorin Oakenshield in his foolish decision to reclaim Erebor." Gandalf's smile disappeared, and he looked Saruman in the eyes without hesitation. "I planned to tell you, but time was pressing. That's why I could only inform Lord Elrond. I believe we should support Thorin's decision. Besides..." His words were abruptly cut off by Saruman's furious tone. "You of all people should know. What if they fail? What if they wake the dragon and can't kill it? And what if we succeed? If Thorin retakes Erebor, our defenses will be strengthened." Gandalf responded confidently, certain that the dwarves would succeed, especially with Aldril's addition. "It's too risky." Saruman retorted, losing his calm demeanor, which left both Gandalf and Elrond puzzled by his behavior. Lately, Saruman had been acting strangely. Gandalf was the first to notice that Saruman was slowly deviating from the purpose they were sent for. This time, Elrond did not remain silent and spoke up. "It would be more dangerous to do nothing. Besides, it would be very helpful if Thorin reclaims Erebor. After all, he is the king of Durin's dwarves, and with just one word, all the dwarves would rise in arms." After Elrond's words, an uncomfortable silence fell. Calming down a bit, Saruman turned to him and said in a hoarse voice, "It seems you both have forgotten that his family has gone mad. First, it was his grandfather, then his father. Do you really think Thorin Oakenshield will be different? Gandalf, it's a danger to us if Thorin reclaims Erebor. He will most likely turn the dwarves against us." Hearing Saruman's words, Gandalf became angry. Something was definitely wrong with Saruman. Sensing something in the distance, Gandalf spoke in a louder tone. "Those dwarves will march to the Lonely Mountain with or without our help. They are determined to reclaim their home." Nodding, Elrond supported Gandalf. "I agree with that. Thorin already has enough support to defeat Smaug." Saruman was too upset. Just as he was about to retort, a soft, melodious, and enchanting voice was heard behind Gandalf and Elrond, making everyone turn to the person who spoke. "I agree with them. The inclusion of Tindamil's son will help them overcome this difficult task." "Lady Galadriel," the three said in unison, for in front of them stood one of the most powerful and beautiful elves in Middle-earth. Her hair shone like gold in the sunlight, and her eyes glowed majestically, having seen the light of the two trees, Telperion and Laurelin. "The son of that woman?" Saruman murmured, quickly shaking his head, somewhat distressed and with lingering fear in his eyes. "It doesn't matter if Tindamil's son accompanies them. The boy wouldn't have a fraction of that woman's strength." Smiling gently, Galadriel looked into the distance, as if observing someone far away. "He will have the strength. This is the beginning of his journey. Sooner or later, he will surpass his mother. I am sure of it, for I see enormous potential in him, even surpassing that of his great-grandfather Erendel. Galadriel's declaration caused the expressions of those present to change drastically. Elrond and Gandalf were surprised but filled with joy, knowing that a powerful ally would be on their side. However, Saruman's face darkened. He knew better than anyone the weight of Galadriel's words. Erendel was so powerful that Sauron would flee if he encountered him on the battlefield, and someone of his caliber in these times would ruin all his plans. Minutes earlier, in a diagonal pavilion near the meeting place of Gandalf and Elrond, Thorin was listening to Gandalf's conversation with Saruman. Beside him was Balin, who had a frustrated look on his face. The fact that Saruman mentioned the illness of Thorin's family made him very angry, but he knew Saruman was right. He wasn't sure if Thorin would be able to overcome this illness, but despite everything, he remained faithful to his decision to follow Thorin. Balin watched as Thorin's mood began to change drastically. His eyes now showed pure fury, which grew even more as he listened to Saruman speak of the illness Thorin's family was suffering. He could not imagine the rage Thorin was suppressing, especially when he heard the unkind words he spoke about his beloved grandfather and his father. However, despite his rage, Thorin merely looked away. Fed up with listening, he issued an order in a voice colder than ice. "Balin, gather the others. We leave at nightfall. Ask Bilbo and Aldril if they want to join us." With that, he left the pavilion. Tonight, the dwarves would leave Rivendell. The hours had passed and the sun was setting. Aldril, along with Bilbo, were returning to their rooms, feeling somewhat tired from the training they had undergone after their conversation with Glorfindel. Both were amazed by the elf's knowledge and stories. Especially Aldril, who discovered that his name comes from the trees Telperion and Laurelin, sacred trees to the elves. He was also surprised to learn that Sauron had a master, Morgoth, who unleashed a war that lasted centuries, and he learned about the Vala's names. As they walked, Aldril glanced at the brooch given to him by his great-grandmother. According to Glorfindel, it was an elven stone that his grandfather Erendel had worn. It offered regeneration and allowed him to recover his stamina more quickly, making him even deadlier in combat. Additionally, his sword Anglical had a very sad past with its last host, Turin, having slain the first dragon. These days have been filled with many events. Fortunately, I've leveled up my mindset, he thought. If I hadn't, I'd have a headache from everything that's happened in Rivendell. Unlike Aldril, Bilbo was quite cheerful despite his fatigue, having heard many impressive stories and discovering that his sword was famous among some elves. Now, I just need a good bath before I can sleep, he thought with a smile. As they passed through the garden where the dwarves had their dinner the previous night, a hurried voice called out to them. "Hey, you two!" gasped Keely, who was out of breath from searching for Aldril and Bilbo for a long time. "What's happening, Keely?" Aldril asked curiously. "Bilbo, Aldril, we have to leave. It's Thorin's orders." "Pack up your things quickly," Keely panted, leaning on his knees from exhaustion. Keely's words startled them, especially Aldril, who hadn't imagined they would leave Rivendell so soon. But prepared for plot twists, he nodded and hurried to his room, followed by Bilbo. Upon reaching his room, Aldril was surprised to find a finely crafted bow of light, delicate wood, beautifully curved and carved with intricate elvish patterns. The string, visibly of high-quality material, resembled those commonly used by the elves. There was a note on the bow that read, "Good luck, Aldril. May the stars guide you as they guided your mother." Glorfindel. "So you knew we were leaving tonight," he murmured, a smile forming on his lips. "I must hurry, but first, meeting Aragorn and Arwen must have helped me level up my world exploration." Opening the system, he checked the world exploration column and was so surprised that he nearly fell over. World exploration, 5.6%. You have surpassed the 0.5% mark and been granted a spatial ring. You have surpassed the 1.5% mark and gained the ability, Hawk's Sight. You have surpassed the 5.5% mark and are given the option to choose between Mjolnir Blade of Miquella or R'hllana Twin Moon Knight Sword ability. Upon seeing all the notifications, Aldril could only say one thing: what the hell?
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.